The boy was lying on the ground and slowly opening his eyes because someone was calling him to wake him up. The boy's name was Jiro, and he clearly didn't want to wake up. Jiro covered his eyes with his hand because the sun shining brightly in the sky was bothering him. The guy asked the voice not to shout and to be quiet, because the loud sound irritated him. Looking up at the sky, Jiro made no attempt to get up and simply said that this was probably the world that was right for him. After lying on the field for some time, the young man finally decided to at least sit down to look around. But apart from the gusts of wind, nothing was happening around. The guy noted that there was absolutely nothing nearby. The voice that was trying to wake Jiro up made itself known again. Hearing his name called again, the boy stood up and turned around to find who was speaking to him. The voice replied that it was on top of the boy. It turned out that the voice belonged to the weapon that was on the boy's waist. The katana, when the boy looked at it, confirmed that it was she who called him. Jiro took the weapon off his belt and decided to examine the katana, analyzing the fact that it could talk. A moment later, the young man hugged his weapon tightly and screamed with happiness. His face turned red, and he even thought that he could die of joy because of such an incredible discovery. Katana simply said that the boy was a fool, since he had already died once. The boy, however, did not seem to care, the smile never leaving his face, and he realized that he had indeed already died once. Remembering someone, the boy thought that the data from his soul was to be used, so he was sent to another world, allowing him to take with him only what he would hold in his hands. So the boy took the katana that was lying nearby. A little late, the young man decided to greet his weapon and patted it on the sheath. The guy had not yet come up with a name for the katana, and simply called it his favorite, which did not please her very much. Katana decided that she didn't want to be stuck with that nickname, so she told the boy that her name was Hotarumaru, but the boy could just call her Hotaru. Jiro smiled and said that he didn't know the weapon had a name, so he thought of giving it to him. The guy added that Hotaru was a pretty good name. However, the next moment, the boy was very surprised, because in his hands was a national treasure, the Hotarumaru katana, which was created during the Nanbokucho period, lost in the Pacific War. Jiro realized that his weapon was very rare, as it was created during the Nanbokucho period, meaning that he had great luck. Katana answered him that the young man had already swung it 3 years ago and, it turns out, did not know her. The guy decided to ask if the weapon knew the name of its owner. Katana, after a short pause as if pondering her answer, said that she too had no idea who her current master was. Jiro was not upset at all and suggested that the weapons introduce themselves to each other once again. The young man smiled and said that his name was Protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, but the katana could simply call him Jiro. The weapon said that the boy had a very beautiful name, and it hoped that the boy would take care of it. The boy, in turn, asked his katana for the same. After Jiro dealt with the katana, he decided to raise another question that interested him, namely, who besides the katana was on his belt, and whether it had a name. Hotaru said that the blade was still too small to speak at all, and if it didn't have a name, then its new owner would have to come up with one right now. Jiro touched the blade to feel some connection with his second weapon and brought it to his chest, then hugged it. Jiro decided that his second weapon would be named Sakura. After he said this, a small wind arose around him, scattering the leaves lying on the ground. After getting to know his companions, Jiro smiled again as he looked at them and said that, since there were only 3 of them in this world, they should try their best to help each other in the future. Hotaru noted that, despite the current situation, Jiro still remained calm, and then asked if the boy had any interests other than katanas. The young man said that perhaps his other interest was girls. Jiro perked up at the attention from Katana and said that he had many interests, but his ardor was calmed by Katana's voice, which concluded that the guy was apparently a good guy. After a short conversation, the weapon said that the young man needed to decide where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do next. Jiro looked around and agreed with the katana. The boy really should have gone somewhere already, but behind the young man, there was only a dense forest. Jiro said that if he had a choice, he would prefer not to go into the forest, but there was nowhere else he could go. Hotaru asked why the boy didn't like the forest so much. The guy replied that he knew nothing about the ecosystem of the world he found himself in, so he should avoid places where strange creatures might live until he gained knowledge about these parts. Hotaru understood what the young man meant and added that, although it was impossible to tell from Jiro's face, it seemed that he had thought carefully about all his further actions. After walking a little further, The young man found a hill in the distance and said that he should go to it. The weapon replied that since the boy had a fairly large field of vision, it would not be difficult for him to decide where to go. Jiro decided that his idea of heading towards the hill was quite good and said that he would go in that direction then. The young man walked for a while and kept noticing some details about how the air in the place he found himself in tasted good, and he also felt lightness in his body as he walked up the hill. Hotaru, on the other hand, wasn't particularly talkative. As the young man walked, he thought about how he had never felt so alive when he was on Earth. And, for now, he liked his place more than his previous one. After some time, Jiro saw some light in the distance. He became curious about the flash of light and what caused it. Hotaru suggested to come closer to find out the answers to the guy's questions. Jiro stretched and said that he reached the top of the hill quickly enough. The boy also noted that he made the right decision not to go into the forest. While the young man was looking around, Hotaru called him to show him something he had missed. Jiro saw 3 different signs. The inscriptions on them were in an unknown language, but the guy was able to read that if you go to the right, you can get to the city of Mikaria if it led you to the Tower of Zakaru. There was also a warning about bandits at the bottom. Hotaru, after hearing all about the places to go, said that they should of course go to the right, to the city of Mikaria. However, the problem was that no one knew how far they had to go to get to their destination. Having decided to listen to Hotaru, Jiro decided to go to the city. However, after an entire hour had passed, he still had not seen anything nearby that looked like a city. Tired, the young man noted that if he continued to walk like this, he would run out of strength and die. Hotaru also understood that, unlike them, the weapons, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, was a man who felt hunger. Katana continued and said that even if he went into the forest to find food, he might just end up eating something weird that would harm him, although no one knew for sure. The boy was surprised that Hotaru was thinking the same thing as him. Jiro didn't want to give up and lose heart, so he said that since he still had strength left, he just needed to keep going for a while longer. The guy was walking along a path that led somewhere down, but this path was the only one that did not lead to the forest that was very close. Looking at the forest, Jiro noted that it looked quite dangerous, so it was worth staying away from it. Suddenly, Hotaru decided to call Jiro and told him that she heard someone screaming. Deciding not to delay, the young man immediately sped up to help the one whose scream the katana heard. However, it turned out that Jiro did not just speed up, but broke into a run. He moved at an incredible speed, which he did not expect from himself. He did not have much strength anymore. As the young man ran, he noted that it was difficult for him, because he felt as if his legs were lighter than they actually were. Hotaru understood what the boy was talking about. She had long suspected that the gravity on this board was much weaker than on Earth, so she suggested that the young man practice running. Katana began to advise Jiro on how to run properly so that it would be much more effective. The guy needed to lean forward and lower his center of gravity. The weapon added that when you need to run, you need to try to push the ground back with your feet to add speed. Following all the advice of his weapon, Jiro noticed that he really began to run even faster, but his feelings had changed, and he no longer felt what he had at the beginning. The young man was pleased and noted that running really did feel much easier, after which he thanked Hotaru for her tips. Katana also said that the young man is also helped by the fact that he has quite strong muscles. The weapon also added that it was hard to believe, since the boy only needed to experience running in practice once to achieve mastery so quickly. The weapon was impressed. The boy was pleased to hear this, so he became a little embarrassed. As he moved towards the forest, Jiro was wary that even if he could run that fast, wouldn't he be in trouble if he suddenly ran into some monsters or got into a fight? Hotaru said that it was most likely really dangerous, but the guy could also get something useful from the forest in the form of information or some food. Jiro decided that he really needed to hurry up and come to someone's aid as soon as possible. Katana said that the guy should just run straight down the road, and when there is a turn, that's where what Hotaru heard would be. The young man noted that it seemed to him that the road he was running on was the only one that led out of the forest, so this made it an excellent place for an attack. Finally reaching the source of the scream, Jiro saw a carriage standing right in the middle of the road. Hotaru advised the young man to duck down so as not to be noticed. Katana noted that there were many people near the cart, so the boy should sneak up closer and assess the situation. The young man did everything as his weapon told him. The frightened girl was surrounded by men who ordered her to hurry up and immediately get them a contract to sign with one of the bandits individually. One of the gang members was pestering the girl and told the boss that he thought people like her didn't have the precious things they were looking for. The man, who was the leader of the bandits, ordered his henchmen not to approach the girl so recklessly. Jiro eavesdropped on the conversation from behind the wagon and heard that the girl was an acolyte, but the boy was called by his weapon. Katana advised the boy to look into the caravan through a small hole in it to see what was inside. However, what was happening in the carriage looked horrific. One of the bandits killed the girl inside and did not want to let her go even after death in order to satisfy his desires. Seeing what was happening in the caravan, Jiro became furious and wanted to deal with the man who had done something like that. Hotaru, feeling the hand of the master touch her, warned that even though the person inside was not an influential bandit, it would still be difficult to kill him silently. However, Jiro could not come to terms with what he saw, and decided that at any cost, he would deal with the person inside. Hotaru realized that it would be impossible to convince the young man, so she said that it would be better to first quickly get rid of the man in the caravan, and then, without giving the gang a chance to notice him, close the distance between them. Little by little, Hotaru pulled out her katana from its sheath and said that she would help the boy in the battle so that he could deal with all the criminals. The weapon continued to give instructions and said that, first, you need to take an attack stance, lower the angle of inclination a little, and take half a step to the right in this stance. By doing everything Hotaru told him to do, Jiro was able to hit the target, who was unaware that a weapon was aimed at them. The boy did everything without a single flaw, so there were no screams. Pulling out her katana, Hotaru noted that she expected nothing less from the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro. The guy with the cold gaze said in a calm voice that he and Hotaru should continue. And the katana at that time only noted that the guy got rid of the enemy without even changing his heart rate. His combat experience from past battles was still there. The bandits who surrounded the girl did not suspect that there was a guy behind them who was gradually approaching them. Jiro acted carefully, trying not to make unnecessary sounds. The girl, noticing the young man, did not scream, for which her future savior mentally thanked her. Waiting for the right moment, Jiro stopped sneaking and suddenly jumped into the crowd of bandits, who were too late to notice someone approaching them. Rushing towards one of the gang members, Jiro immediately swung his katana to get rid of the largest of them. Having neutralized the boss of the criminals, the men were confused. They were so surprised that they could not group up to fight back the guy. Having managed to hit another opponent, Jiro tried to deal with everyone individually as quickly as possible before they attacked him in a crowd. However, as soon as the guy lunged to turn around, he saw an arrow flying at him, which he managed to dodge at the last moment. Seeing the place from which he was shot, the young man decided to use his second weapon. Jiro threw Sakura right into the bushes from which the arrow was flying at him and hit one of the bandits, promising the blade to come back for him later. Returning closer to the girl, the guy continued the fight, but his opponents had already managed to arm themselves with cold weapons, but this did not help them. The acolyte, watching the battle unfold, was surprised by the bravery of the young man. As Jiro pointed his katana towards the man who jumped on him from the front, he heard the girl calling him. She warned him that they were preparing to attack him from behind. The young man quickly understands what he needs to do and jumps back to interrupt the attack being prepared for him from behind. He pushes the man with his shoulder, causing him to retreat. Because of the push, the man doesn't have time to do anything to the guy. So Jiro quickly turns around and strikes the gang member with his katana. Remembering that one of the criminals was also attacking him on the opposite side, he turns around again and kicks the attacker. Pulling his weapon out of the body of his defeated opponent, the guy pushes the man who attacked him so far that he falls on another bandit, thereby knocking him down. Having finally repelled a significant portion of the attacks, the young man immediately retreats to the girl, to take her hand and shield her with himself. Holding the acolyte on his wrist with one hand and holding the katana with the other, Jiro never lets down his guard for a second to protect both himself and the lady. The girl didn't say anything, but she knew that the guy wanted to help her, so she let go of his hand and didn't go anywhere. Seeing the two more bandits were on their feet, Jiro was determined to finish the job. Before his reincarnation, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, who was only 16 years old when he died from a stab wound. He killed 2 robbers without hesitation. But something had changed him a long time ago. When the boy was little, A sense of justice was already born in his heart when he watched television, which broadcast news about another murderer who was sentenced to life imprisonment. Listening to what the criminal had done, the boy could not understand why the killer could not simply be killed in return. Such reasoning was unusually cruel for a child. For the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, such individuals were disgusting, and he equated them with things. But his distorted value system did not interfere with his daily life. He lived with a constant feeling of alienation. Back to the present, nothing had changed for the boy. The young man was protecting the girl without thinking about the danger, and one of the gang members was talking about how everything was going well until Jiro showed up. Seeing how the young man dealt with almost all the bandits, one of the criminals suggested retreating and leaving, so as not to suffer a final defeat. The big man understood the danger of the situation, so he agreed that the bandits should run away rather than continue fighting the boy. The gang members asked them to hurry. However, the man thought that even if they ran away, the guy might catch up with them, so he turned around and pushed one of the gang members to give himself a head start. The criminal did not expect such betrayal from the man and fell to the ground while the large man ran away and asked to detain Jiro for his sake. However, the young man had no intention of recklessly taking the lives of the remaining bandits, so without turning away from his opponents, he asked the girl if there was a reason to leave these bandits alive. After the girl heard the question asked of her, she hardly thought for a minute, answering that there was no need to spare those who attacked her. This phrase amused Jiro, causing him to even smile frighteningly, realizing that he had been given the go-ahead to deal with the criminals. He was glad that at least in this world, he could be himself and administer justice on his own. When Jiro reached the next gang member, he stopped for a moment because the man was scared, seeing how the guy dealt with all the others. The man begged for mercy and pleaded for Jiro to stop. Hearing this request, the guy actually stopped, but only to turn around and ask the girl what she thought about it. However, the girl was adamant. She asked why the criminal himself did not stop when the husband and wife he had killed asked him to. Did the gang member think about mercy for even a moment when they asked him to? Realizing that this was all the girl wanted to say, Jiro dealt with the last bandit, after which his gaze transformed and returned to its normal state. Jiro took the katana in both hands and asked her if she was okay. Hotaru immediately replied that she was fine and added that the young man was great, as he had finished his first battle with distinction. The protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro was happy to hear praise from his weapon, so he smiled and replied that without his katana, he would not have been able to do anything like that. So he won thanks to it. Katana replied that there was no need to thank her, but rather to go to the place where he had thrown his blade so as not to forget Sakura. Remembering his second weapon, the boy thanked it as well. Seeing the strange way the girl was looking at him, Jiro asked if she thought it was strange that he was talking to his gun, but ignoring the question, the lady asked if the young man wanted to take the robber's guns. Jiro was a little embarrassed, but the katana advised him to pull himself together and behave more adequately with the girl. Looking for his second weapon, the guy thought about what he could do with someone else's. He suggested that the girl collect everything and just sell it. After finding Sakura, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro apologized to her for stabbing her into such a dirty place as a bandit's body. He asked her if she was lonely, and then hugged her. Seeing the boy's behavior, the girl became more and more surprised at how strange he was. After some time, the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro was able to collect all the weapons that the bandits had in one pile, after which the young man noted that the criminals did not even have any bags with them. Jiro approached the girl and asked what they would do with all the weapons, since he thought she couldn't use them. The girl didn't answer, thinking about something. Later she exhaled and said that she noticed from the very beginning that the young man apparently was not aware of one detail. The girl explained that the weapon could only be used if he were its owner. If it was not registered, it could not be used. The weapon is an identification document, but the bandits' weapons can be handed in for a reward. Jiro said that he understood everything and concluded that a weapon cannot hurt anyone if it is not used by its owner. The girl asked them to leave the place they were in as soon as possible, because it was only a matter of time before the magical beasts would come to the smell of blood. Jiro only thought that he was right about the forest being dangerous. After a short pause, the girl said that although it was a little late, her name was Sistina. She thanked the guy for saving her from such a dangerous situation. Later, the girl decided to take care of those who had died at the hands of bandits. The nobles with whom Sistina traveled accompanied her on the way, so she wanted to at least pay them a little respect by saying goodbye. Jiro said that he was sorry, because if he had come a little earlier, he might have been able to save not only the girl, but them as well. However, Sistina quickly stopped the guy's speech. The girl looked at the young man and said that it was only thanks to him that she was still alive, and it could still return the property to the relatives of those who died. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, wondered why in this world only part of the property of their deceased relatives was returned to the family. Sistina calmed the horse and offered the boy to send it to the nearest city of Mikarena, to which the young man quickly agreed. The girl and the boy were riding in the carriage slowly, so Jiro decided to think about everything that had happened. But first he thought about who was next to him. Looking at Sistina, Jiro noted that she was very beautiful. The girl was not distracted by the guy's glances, because she was busy driving the carriage. However, Jiro was in no hurry to look away from his new acquaintance and noted to himself that she had a very good figure with beautiful curves. Noticing how the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro was looking at her, the girl turned around, but the guy immediately turned away. Because the road was not short and the day was drawing to an end, Sistina suggested that the young man stop and spend the night in the open air. After some time, the couple made a fire, and the girl put something to cook on the fire to have a snack. After the food was prepared, the girl immediately apologized for such a simple dish, because she made it only from what resin she found in the cart. Jiro looked at what was on the plate, and at first didn't understand what it was. But he remembered that a similar dish was prepared for him by a maid in Japan when he was little. While the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro was eating the prepared dish, he remembered the strange things that happened to him in both his past life and his current life. The guy remembered how bandits attacked him, taking his life, and how he found himself in a new world. Because his memories weren't happy, Jiro didn't even notice that he started crying. The girl thought that it was because she made such a bad meal that it made him cry. However, the young man, wiping away his tears, said that everything was quite the opposite, and the girl, as it seemed to him, had prepared something so delicious, as if the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro had eaten something like that for the first time. The girl was a little confused, because she clearly did not expect such a reaction to what she had prepared from improvised means. Having calmed down a bit, Jiro decided to say that he actually knew nothing about the world he found himself in. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, asked Sistina to help him and teach him everything she knew about the place he found himself in. The girl took the young man's request calmly, but she didn't even know where to start her story and how to explain everything. After thinking for a while, Jiro decided to offer Sistina a full-fledged acquaintance. Sistine agreed, saying it was a good idea for her to show how personal identification works. Saying the word display, a small frame appeared in front of the girl. Seeing what appeared in front of the interlocutor, the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro was very surprised, because he did not expect such technology in such a world. Although the guy saw a display in front of him, which was called a window of consciousness, he still could not understand how it worked, but he could still read what was written on it. It turned out that the girl had 3 skills that God had given her, namely language, literacy, and comfortable understanding. As it seemed to the young man, literacy was the most useful skill. The girl's skills included cooking, cleaning, and taking care of children, so the young man thought that she would make a great maid. The display also said that she was 16 years old. However, one of the skills confused the guy, and he asked what the art of lovemaking meant, assuming that this skill was for late nights. Hearing the question asked, the girl blushed deeply and covered herself with her hands, because she did not expect the young man to ask something like that. Sistine was greatly surprised that the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro was able to read even what was encrypted in the information about her. The guy immediately apologized for reading such information without her consent and thought about the fact that he could read everything, no matter what text was in front of him. Perhaps it was the work of divine power. Having calmed down a little, the girl asked the guy to show her his window of consciousness, but he first wanted to know how it worked, because he couldn't make it appear. Sistina, hearing such a request, asked again whether Jiro really did not know how to use it and, after an affirmative answer, believed him. After thinking for a while, the girl decided to explain to the boy how to open the window of consciousness and put her hands in front of herself. She said that all you need to do is focus on yourself and say, display. Jiro did everything as he was told. The next moment, a window of consciousness appeared in front of the boy. His skills were literacy, understanding, repair maintenance, spiritual training, and weapons expertise. Seeing the special skill at the bottom of the frame, the young man smiled a little, because he was a master of magic swords, which made him happy. The girl looked at the guy and asked him if she could see what he had written. After he agreed, the sign moved closer to her interlocutor. Sistine looked closely at the window of consciousness and thanked the young man for showing it to her. Returning it back to the boy, he touched it, after which the window disappeared. The guy was surprised that the window of consciousness disappeared from the touch, but not much. The girl decided to ask how to pronounce the boy's name. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, pronounced his first and last name syllable by syllable, so that the girl would remember it, after which Sistina asked if he knew what acolytes did. Jiro thought about it, because the word acolyte was similar in meaning to a priest, but the abilities that the girl possessed did not give the young man a sufficient explanation. The young man was most confused by her art of lovemaking because Sistina looked very neat and righteous, but he did not know what she could do at night. The girl noticed that the young man was taking too long to answer, so she coughed a little, attracting his attention. Jiro replied that he did not know the answer to her question. Sistina decided to explain who she was. However, after she began, the young man noted that although her explanations were clear, they raised a number of questions. The girl told me that in one temple, especially gifted people were raised to become battle maids, or something like that. The guy only understood the gist. Among all the acolytes, Sistine had mastered 3 skills: guardian, restoration, and negotiation, making her a master acolyte. When the girl became a master acolyte, she was rewarded with a special skill as an additional ability. The ability was quite important, so she really wanted to keep it a secret from the others. The guy realized that by seeing what the girl wanted to keep secret, he had violated her personal space, which embarrassed her. The girl also added that acolytes have a rather popular ability called contract. An acolyte bound to someone by a contract is obliged to carry out any order. If this does not happen, then a severe punishment will befall him. However, there was a positive side to this. Because of the contract, the acolyte's power is greatly increased, allowing him to fight. This power is strong, but is only activated under the contract. Sistina's future husband's parents donated a lot of money to the temple in order to obtain the right to conclude a contract between her and their son. Because of this, the girl was left in a state without concluding a contract with anyone, because her power, in fact, now belonged to her fiancé. That is why, at the moment when she was attacked, she could not use her power. Because of the inactive contract, she was helpless against the attackers. Sistine was irritated by this fact, because she could not even use her power to save those who were near her, because she was not allowed to do so. The young man, having learned new information, remembered that the girl really was the only untouched person of those who were attacked. Jiro understood the feeling the girl was experiencing, because she had no chance to save the people who were being killed right in front of her. Sistine understood how it might look from the outside, but she really couldn't move in situations like that because she was an acolyte. Acolytes can only use their power while performing a contract, and breaking this rule will cause the acolyte to lose their power. So if Sistina loses her power, she will never be able to save anyone. Jiro listened attentively to everything the girl was telling him. He understood her situation, and the interlocutor seemed ready to cry. After a short pause, the girl noted that the main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, is an unusual person, because when she saw his window of consciousness, she realized that she had never known about such skills and abilities before. Sistine was also surprised by the young man's profession, which was very unusual. She knew nothing about what magic sword masters do. A little embarrassed, the young man thought about the god who gave him something like this, and said that from time to time unfamiliar professions are encountered. Sistine also asked if the young man had seen her special skill. Thinking about the art of lovemaking, the boy blushed, but the girl meant the text of wisdom. If Sistine thinks about something she sees, she can get some information about the object. If the girl thinks about one word, the wisdom text will provide all the information about it. Thinking about the young man's profession, the girl said that it was usually called a magic swordsman, but the boy's was called a magic sword master, and the boy also had the skills that blacksmiths had. Sistina also noted that the young man had a special skill, after which the guy asked if he should try his convenient understanding. Looking at the cart, the young man immediately thought that the cart had a capacity of 8 units and a strength of 34 units. Jiro noted that it was very convenient, and Sistina said that this skill was very similar to her wisdom text. Sistina then asked if the boy had tried the weapon expert skill, after which the boy denied it and added that he would fix it right away. With the help of his skill, the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, learned that his katana has the rank S+. Its training level is maximum. The energy absorption level is 0. The weapon's skills included revival, bloodlust sensation, body enhancement, and much more. Sistine noted that the boy's weapon was literally of a divine level, and her wisdom text didn't even react to the katana. As for Sakura, she had a rank of D+, a training level of 33, and an absorption level of 47. Her skills were sympathy, present sense, precision, agility adjustment. The boy was impressed by both of his weapons. Sistine asked what the energy absorption level meant, but the boy was interested in one of Hotaru's skills. Holding the katana in both hands, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro said the word revival and asked Hotaru to revival. The weapon advised the young man to pull it out of its sheath and place it next to him. The guy did everything he was told, and again spoke the words of revival. The next moment, instead of a katana, a girl appeared in front of Jiro. Hotaru looked at herself a little and said that being in a human body was quite interesting. Sistine was very surprised by what a high-ranking weapon could do, but the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, was simply delighted by what happened. The acolyte asked the young man to make Hotaru wear some clothes, after which the girl asked Jiro to give her scabbard. The young man did not know why, but he did what the girl told him to do. And after some time, the scabbard began to shine. It turned out that the scabbard had turned into clothes for Hotaru. She thought that this should be quite enough, after which she called her owner again. After the boy came closer to Hotaru, she hugged him and noted that her master was very warm. Smiling, the girl did not let go of the young man from her embrace and said that the human body is truly simply charming. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, was a little embarrassed but still glad that he felt Hotaru's warmth, because the feeling of such a connection filled him with joy. Still holding the boy, the girl said that the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro could now not worry about anything. Later, Hotaru added that from now on, they could be connected to each other just like a normal man and woman. Hearing what Hotaru said, Jiro blushed, and Sistina assumed that the girl was referring to the art of making love. The young man did not expect to hear something like that from his katana. But Hotaru was completely calm. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, having recovered from the shock, immediately tried to hug the girl again. But she deftly turned away from him. Taking the sword, Hotaru decided to cool the young man's ardor, saying that she was a little worried about how the boy was reacting so sharply to her words. The girl laughed a little after the boy knelt down and asked her not to tease him. Deciding to end this conversation, Hotaru said that she would remain on guard tonight, so that Sistina and the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro could rest. While making the bed, the acolyte decided to call Jiro and warn him about something. Hotaru turned slightly to hear what the couple was saying. Sistina said that she would like to talk to the boy tomorrow. Jiro, hearing this, replied that her words sounded rather vague, since she did not want to talk about it now. Hotaru heard the girl say that she hadn't decided yet if she wanted to tell the guy anything at all, so she decided to think about it for a while. At night, when the fire was burning out, the main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, could not sleep, and thought only about whether there was something important in what the girl wanted to tell him. Jiro thought that perhaps Sistina wanted to say that they should break up tomorrow, but the boy didn't want to allow that. Noticing that the boy wasn't sleeping, Hotaru called him. The girl, seeing that her owner could not sleep, came up to him and sat closer, showing him that he needed to be quieter. The guy looked at Sistina sleeping behind him and realized that he did not want to wake her up. Hotaru asked why the boy couldn't sleep, after which the boy said that his thoughts were bothering him. The girl pulled the boy's head closer to hers and asked if perhaps he had so many thoughts because of what happened to him during the day. The girl assumed that the guy still hadn't gotten used to the fact that he had recently lost his life. After which he ended up in another world, and then got into a fight. Hotaru decided to ask how many people the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro had killed, if you count the world he lived in before. The young man replied that he had never counted their number, because after all, he had only cut a few things, since he did not consider criminals to be people. Hotaru said that in the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro's home world, although it was self-defense, he killed two people, but one of them was his biological father. The guy was not surprised by such a statement because, as he believed, that man, although he was his biological father, had problems with money. So he decided to break into the house of his ex-wife. Jiro didn't care what the man felt at that moment, because the man had stabbed his own son with a sword. The girl asked why. If the young man knew who that man was, he decided to get rid of him at the end. The protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro responded that if he hadn't done that, his biological father would have been able to steal Hotaru and Sakura. Having heard the true reason, the girl was very happy. A blush appeared on her cheeks, and she said that she understood everything. After the young man's words, the girl said that now they could become even closer than before, because there was no point in standing guard anyway, since everything was calm nearby. The guy replied that he was worried about something else, but Hotaru did not listen to him. The girl made Jiro lie down and leaned closer to him, asking why he didn't want to be with her. The protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro replied that he was just a little excited from the surprise. Remembering how the boy used to sleep, Hotaru, being a sword, was always by his side. Every night, the boy hugged his katana, never letting it go. The protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro recalled that he actually hugged Hotaru every night when she was a katana. He asked if the warmth of his body gave her a feeling of nostalgia, to which Hotaru answered in the affirmative. The girl said that the guy's warmth and the beating of his heart always excited her. She felt the guy's body every day. Hotaru began to please the young man, touching his body. The guy's heart was beating loudly, and his face was very red. The girl clearly knew what to do to please the main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, because the only thing the young man could say was the name of his katana. Touching her curves to the guy's interesting place, the girl said that it was so strange that she had never felt such heat before. Hotaru reminded the boy to be quiet because Sestina was sleeping nearby. The boy barely held back the sounds from his mouth, which indicated that he was very pleased. The girl decided that it was time to take everything off her shoulders and let the boy touch what he had dreamed of for so long. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, was very embarrassed. Because this was happening to him for the first time, he wanted to say something to the girl, but she interrupted him and replied that everything was fine. The girl was already completely ready, telling the guy that she would accept everything, so he didn't have to worry about anything. Jiro was very happy to hear such words from the one who managed to turn his head with her appearance alone. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, kissed Hotaru, thinking that she was his dearest and sweetest girl who had been by his side for a very long time. Hotaru, although she was the one who initiated such actions, still felt a little embarrassed when the young man looked at her. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, did not hesitate and did what he wanted, not forgetting about Hotaru's feelings. The guy and the girl were together and gave each other love. After Jiro fell asleep, the girl hugged him and told him that despite all the difficulties, he was ready for the world he found himself in. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, could not hear what Hotaru was saying, but it seemed like the girl was simply speaking her thoughts out loud. The girl said that what he got rid of in his world allowed him to gain a sword that was unshakable in the face of evil. Kissing the boy on the forehead, Hotaru added that what the boy had now was what many warriors of the past had desired to gain. The boy's talent was the greatest. Hugging the sleeping boy and closing her eyes, Hotaru noted that the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, was a very interesting person. Turning to Sistine, the girl decided to clarify whether she thought the same. It turned out that the acolyte was not asleep. The girl blushed deeply from being caught cheating. Hotaru continued her reasoning that the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, has always felt lonely. His attitude towards evil is different from most people, so the current world is necessary for him, a world that is ready to accept anything. The girl also added that in addition to peace, he also found a partner in the person of his loyal weapon, because Hotaru would also accept him in any way. Hearing how Hotaru reasons, Sistine noted how amazing she is, because loyalty is a feeling that is not so easy to maintain. After Sistine heard such touching words, she wanted to add something too, which made her slightly rise from the bed. However, having changed her mind, the girl returned to her place and covered her head with the blanket, because she was too embarrassed. Hotaru noticed this and smiled. It was deep into the night, and the girl realized that her actions had helped another person make a difficult decision. When morning came, Sistina greeted Jiro and said she had brought water. The young man thanked his new acquaintance, after which he realized that she wanted to continue the conversation she tried to start the day before. The girl gathered her thoughts and confidently voiced what she had been thinking about lately. Sistina offered the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro to make a contract with her. When it was night, the fire was slowly burning out, giving off the last bits of warmth. Wataru was impatient and could not wait any longer for the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro to touch her. Jiro, holding the girl by the waist, said that he probably wouldn't be able to do everything gently because it was his first time. However, the girl understood everything and wasn't against it. The guy's fingers touched the girl's interesting places. The young man was very nervous, but he tried to give his partner pleasant sensations. The girl did not complain about anything, only making muffled sounds. She liked what the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro did to her. Hotaru was pleasantly surprised, because for her such feelings were also the first. She finally learned what those who merge together feel. The girl remembered those moments when the guy first saw her. The eyes of the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, shone so brightly when he looked at her. Hotaru began to enjoy the manipulations that Jiro performed on her. She realized that the man she met many years ago had grown up to be a strong man. While hugging the girl, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro tried to do everything so that she would like it. Hotaru had been waiting for this moment for a long time, so she enjoyed the experience she was getting with Jiro. Seeing out of the corner of her eye that someone was moving not far from them, Hotaru realized that the girl lying next to her was not sleeping and had heard everything. However, even though what the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro and Hotaru were doing was no longer a secret, the girl mentally apologized to Sistina and had no intention of stopping. The acolyte lay under the blanket, shaking from hearing what the people next to her were doing. Sistina blushed and tried not to show that she was awake. Looking at the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, Hotaru raised her hands, calling the young man into her arms, and told Jiro to quickly satisfy her. Covering himself completely with a blanket, Jiro stopped holding back and did what his partner expected of him. Hotaru was enjoying what the boy was doing to him so much that she couldn't hold back her voice of pleasure. Her toes curled as she sank into the intense sensations. Jiro kissed Hotaru. The boy and the girl enjoyed each other. They both closed their eyes to make the sensations more intense. Without taking breaks, the young man was full of strength to bring the girl to those sensations that she would not be able to forget. Hotaru, unable to take what was being done to her any longer, said that it would soon feel too good. Hotaru's body was shaking with pleasure. She couldn't stop talking about how good it felt. Beads of sweat were rolling down her face. Changing positions, the couple experienced sensations previously unknown to both of them. The girl understood that she would not last long, so she thought about how good it would be for her in the end. After some time, Hotaru felt that she could no longer hold back and screamed because it was too pleasant. After it was over, the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, fell asleep and Hotaru hugged her partner tightly, thinking about how much she loved him. Recalling how the parents of one young man begged Sistina to make a contract with their son, the girl remembered that they did everything in their power, even bringing their entire family fortune, to make the agreement. Another acolyte, seeing the two people, told them that if they continued to come to the temple again and again, there would be problems. Sistina asked the man and woman to get up from the ground. Seeing how the parents wanted to make their son's future more secure, the girl exhaled and said that she would sign a contract with their son. Back in the present, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro stood before the girl, not understanding why the acolyte had suddenly decided to offer him something like that. Hotaru hugged Jiro and said that the boy looked stupid when he asked obvious things again. Recalling what Sistina managed to hear at night, the girl said that if the guy asks why she is offering him a contract, she will simply answer that she decided so. However, smiling, the girl added that she wanted to make such a proposal because she believed that their meeting was fate. Sistine thought that if the lord and lady had not visited the temple, she would still be working there, and if she had not agreed to their proposal, the man and woman would still be alive. However, if this had not happened, she would never have met the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, who came to her aid. Things didn't turn out as they were supposed to. After the man and woman came to the temple, they took the girl with them, and then they were attacked by bandits who took the lives of innocent people. Things could have ended even worse. One of the bandits wanted to forcibly enter into a contract with the acolyte, but Jiro came to her aid and saved the girl. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, said that he wanted to learn more about the world he found himself in, and Sistina just had the skill of text of wisdom. The girl blushed a little after she started her speech, and added that she also wanted to protect people. So she offered to sign a contract. The young man interrupted the awkward speech of his interlocutor and said that he agreed, and he would also be happy to connect his life with Sistina. After the guy himself asked to sign a contract with him, the girl smiled and breathed a sigh of relief. She said that she was grateful to Jiro for his answer. Deciding not to delay, the girl began to perform a ritual with the help of which a contract could be concluded. By pronouncing some words, the acolyte bound herself to the young man. 3 contracts appeared before the people: the contract of hire, master and servant, and subordination. The contract of hire was the lowest in rank, since the acolyte could terminate it if the master violated the terms. The contract of subordination was the strongest. The more restrictive the contract, the more severe the colitis became. To test this, many would first enter into a rental contract before entering into a more permanent one. However, the most practical was the master and servant contract. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, decided to take a closer look at the strongest contract because its color was the most ominous. Sistina said that the contract of submission is a contract of complete obedience. Hearing these words, the young man immediately imagined in his head how the acolyte would do everything he asked. Sistina did not say out loud the thought that the strongest contract was more like slavery, which slightly alarmed her. Thinking only about the skill art of making love, the boy immediately blushed. Hotaru, seeing this, leaned closer to the boy and asked if he was having fun. Realizing that the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, had already decided what kind of contract he wanted, the girl thought that she had expected something like this. However, what happened next was something the girl had not expected. The guy raised his hand and twirled it in the air. The next moment, he touched the contract with his index finger. As if replacing a pen or pencil, he began to erase and rewrite its contents. The young man changed the part about complete obedience to the master's orders to permission to exercise a one-time veto power. Jiro didn't like the fact that the acolyte and his power were to be used only for the sake of the master, and also that if this rule was broken, the acolyte would lose all his powers. The young man simply deleted this sentence. Jiro pointed out that the main rule is that an acolyte's power should only be used for the sake of the master. However, when acolyte Sistina deems it necessary, she can rely on her own judgment and use her power as she wishes. The girl could not believe that the young man had changed the contents of the contract to something that would be much more convenient for the acolyte herself. The young man asked her how she felt about the changes he had made. However, the guy also thought that this way he could persuade her to do what he wanted. For example, take a bath with him sometime. The girl, having recovered from the shock, came closer to the guy and asked why he rewrote her contract. Because no one should be capable of such a thing. An acolyte's contract cannot be changed, because the acolyte's power can only be used for the sake of the one with whom the contract is made. An acolyte must be extremely careful to choose a reliable person. Having heard what criteria the contract would involve, the young man thanked the blushing girl for having such a good opinion of the guy. Jiro said that the way he rewrote the contract should be obvious because Sistina saw what kind of ability the boy had. He had a language literacy skill that helped him. With language literacy, he can understand any word or conversation. He can read and write anything. At least that's how the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro understood this skill. Because of this skill, the young man thought that he could change the contract, and then he decided to try, and it turned out that it worked. Sistine was surprised at first, but then laughed out loud, realizing that the young man was acting at random. The girl thought that she really was born only to meet Jiro. The training of an acolyte is very difficult. She trained daily and had to do everything perfectly. The girl understood that everything she did was for the sake of one day, when she could offer her whole self to someone. With her hand on the contract, Sistine said her name and said that she acknowledged the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro as her master. Hotaru witnessed their deal. After the contract was made, he disappeared, leaving behind a bright light that made the boy cover his eyes with his hand. From that day on, the acolyte will serve the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro. A little embarrassed, the boy noted that this was a good thing. Not seeing happiness on the boy's face Hotaru asked why the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro couldn't make a happier face. Jiro replied that because he already had Hotaru and Sakura, and now he had met Sistina, he was scared. The young man was blessed with great luck, so he thought that sooner or later in the future only something bad would await him and them. The girls, hearing such fears, smiled a little. Hotaru said that the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro should just accept the fact that everything will be fine now that he was blessed with this world. Sistina agreed with her, deciding to believe what the girls were trying to convince him of. Jiro replied that Hotaru was probably right. Although the reaction was delayed, the guy shook his new companion's hand and said that it was nice to meet her. The girl asked him to rely on her in the future. Smiling, the guy thought that maybe everything would really be okay, and from that day on, Sistina could call him master. The girl did not even think of resisting and replied that she would call him Jiro. The instant reaction amazed the guy. However, a moment later, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro apologized for his behavior and asked the girl to call him simply by his first name. Sistina was not at all against the first option. The girl suggested calling the boy by his name when strangers were around, and when they were alone, she would call him master. Jiro agreed, because in fact, he didn't care what the girl would call him. Going further into the city, the girl decided to ask what the main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, wants to do in general, and whether he has any goal. Jiro felt a little sad and thought that the only role that God had prepared for him was to live his second life better than the previous one. In this world, everything was different. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, thought and answered that he did not have a specific goal. He just wanted to find his place where he could spend his life peacefully, finding some kind of activity for earning money. If Jiro can live his life being true to himself, that will be enough for him. If Sistina is by his side, his life will be even happier. Not hearing any comment, the guy even thought that the acolyte was disappointed in him and wanted to terminate their contract. But everything was completely different. The girl, on the contrary, answered that this means that you can devote yourself to your favorite business and become who you really want to be. The young man even felt a little embarrassed, thinking that the girl thought too highly of him. Sistina interrupted the guy and said that she finally saw the city ahead. Having reached the city, the young man did not yet know where he was going, but he was in the company of two wonderful girls. The city of Makaria was quite large. It included many houses standing next to each other. Hotaru also noted that there were many people on the streets. Later, the young man asked what Sistina was talking about with the guards at the city gates. The girl replied that usually you have to pay to enter the city, but if you tell the guards that people are an acolyte with a master, then they can be exempted from the fee. The guy noted that it was very convenient, but the girl quickly added that it imposed certain obligations. Jiro asked what they should do, but Sistina promised to tell him about it later. Even though Sistina now had certain obligations, she wanted to enter the city for free at all costs. Hotaru, hearing the conversation, thought that perhaps they really were that short of money to live on. The girl even suggested that they needed to collect more animal skins, but Sistina said that the ones they had were more than enough. The acolyte added that they would be able to get enough money for the skins they got by selling them, as well as receive a reward for the bandits they killed. However, there was something the girl could not say. The girl was thinking about how to somehow help the son of the dead people. The young man immediately agreed. Sistine was surprised that the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro understood what she wanted to say. The guy replied that when a girl made a sad face before asking for something, he could not refuse her. Jiro immediately realized that Sistina wanted to do something good for the relatives of those who died at the hands of bandits. The guy suggested keeping only the most necessary things for himself and sending the rest. The acolyte was very grateful to the young man. Arriving at one of the houses, Sistina remembered how they were told that the property that the bandits owned would be given to the one who was able to defeat them. The girl said that now everything belongs to the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro. The young man accepted this fact. Entering the building, Sistine thought that she was very glad that she had made a contract with a person like Jiro. The girl greeted someone and said that she wanted to sell a carriage. The man went outside and examined the horse. He noted that it was in good condition. Sistine asked how much the man could offer them for her and the cart. The man thought that people did not know how much it was really worth, and offered only 200,000 mar, but the acolyte asked for a higher price. The man realized that the girl knew how to bargain, so he offered 250,000 because 200 was not enough for the girl. The man gradually raised the price, But Sistina was not satisfied with anything. The main character Fujinomiya Sojiro and Hotaru noted that the girl was holding up well. The man offered the last option of 290,000, but he himself understood that this horse was worth no less than 350. The girl, using one of her skills, realized that the man wanted to deceive her, so she made him offer her the amount he was thinking of. Jiro noted that the girl did an excellent job of bargaining, to which Sistina replied that it was all thanks to the negotiation skill. This skill allowed one to see the upper limit of the amount a person could agree to, so the acolyte waited for the moment to use it. Jiro asked if the girl had used this skill before, to which he received a negative answer. She thought that it was not entirely fair, so she did not want to use it. Hotaru noted that Sistina was a very good girl. Noticing the tavern nearby, the girl suggested stopping there and just relaxing for now. At the entrance, the company was met by a woman who offered the people 2 rooms for the night. However, before the boy could answer, the acolyte said that they would only need 1. Hotaru understood how the negotiation skill actually worked. Sistina also suggested buying some food to keep them going. Jiro was glad that they could finally rest after such a long journey. There was a mug on the table that turned out to contain alcohol. The girl explained that it was a fermented alcoholic drink that was quite popular. Jiro said that Hotaru was really cute when she couldn't stop complaining about wanting to drink alcohol, but the girl said that it was just a negotiation. Having tried the drink, the girl really liked its taste. Sistina, eating the dish, noted that the fried vegetables were also very tasty. After the group ate, Sistine said that she could now tell Hotaru and the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro about their obligations. They had to explore the tower. The boy didn't understand what the girl meant, so he asked her for clarification. The acolyte said that the tower was a building filled with monsters. Since ancient times, it has been known that there are 10 towers in which monsters endlessly appear. When a tower is full, monsters begin to come out, so 3 towers have already been destroyed. Since then, no monsters have been seen in the area, and the lands have been blessed with prosperity. Because of this, all the cities continue to try to conquer these towers for the sake of safety and prosperity. Hotaru said that she understood what they should do. The protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro also noted that it was not a bad idea to visit these towers. Hotaru added that going to these towers would be a good training for the guy, and it would also be useful for her. The main character Fujinomiya Sojiro noted that the girl was already drunk. Sistine, hearing such easy answers, said that her new master was a very reliable man. The company continued to sit in the tavern for some time. After some time, the young man found himself in a bathhouse to wash himself after a long journey. However, this was unusual for him. When Jiro asked Sistina about a bath, she said that she did not know what it was. Therefore, the bathhouse was the only salvation from the dirt. However, the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro wanted to go to the bath much more, because he could invite his companions there, who did not refuse him. He was very happy imagining how the girls would wash the boy. But his only companion was Sakura, whom he was able to take with him. Jiro hoped that she too would soon be able to become human. After leaving the bath, Hotaru saw that the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, was already waiting for her nearby. The guy asked the girl if she liked the bath. Hotaru answered that it was not bad at all and refreshing. However, it would be better if there was hot water. The boy said that this made him want to open the hot springs someday. The girl replied that she would look forward to it. A little later, the guy noticed that the girl wanted to go somewhere, so he reminded her that they should wait for Sistina. Hotaru replied that they did not need to waste time, because they could train until the acolyte returned. The girl suggested using half of the room they were in. Poor Hotaru said that the boy would need to reach her form, but it would not be as easy as the boy might think. The main character Fujinomiya Sojiro took this training seriously and said that he would try his best, thinking that he would please the girl when he won. Hotaru said that she was not at all against having fun, after which the guy immediately rushed towards the girl. The main character Fujinomiya Sojiro tried to move quickly, but Hotaru kept dodging him, not allowing him to touch her. Those who were in the bathhouse watched the couple's peculiar game. The young man could not touch the girl, but apparently began to understand her tactics. Hotaru also realized that Jiro would change his movements and praised him. The main character Fujinomiya Sojiro decided to give in to his instincts and just follow them. However, this funny training was interrupted by the voice of some woman who was yelling at the guy to stop. Later, the woman looked at the people around her and asked why they didn't tell the couple to stop fooling around. since they were all in the way. However, no one present complained about anything. Hotaru knew that this would happen, so she just smiled at the woman, still deciding to stop. The girl turned to the boy and said that they should stop this time. Looking at Hotaru, Jiro extended his hand and thanked her for the training, even though it was unfinished. The girl noted that Jiro was indeed a very well-mannered guy, so she blushed slightly, but shook the young man's hand. Hotaru noted that the boy's movements were not so bad when he concentrated only on his desire. The girl advised the young man to remember these actions and apply them in everyday life. Jiro was a little confused, because he realized that the girl had deliberately used something that the guy liked in order to train him. Because of their conversation, the couple didn't even notice how Sistina approached them, holding her clothes in her hands. The girl apologized for being late and for Hotaru and the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro having to wait for her. The young man, upon seeing the girl, noted that she had become so clean that she seemed to be starting to shine, trying not to get hung up on it. The guy suggested that the girls go back to the tavern. Entering the room, Jiro immediately jumped onto the bed, as he could finally relax. Sistine noted that Hotaru had decided to stay downstairs to drink some more. Turning to the guy, the acolyte decided to ask him for one favor before they went to bed. The young man sat on the bed to listen to the girl's request, but she asked him to undress, which greatly embarrassed Jiro. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, had already managed to blush, but Sistina said that although they were planning to buy equipment tomorrow, she had already managed to buy some things. The girl wanted Jiro to try on what Sistina had bought, although he was thinking about something completely different when he heard her request. After the girl began to undress the guy, he asked why she was doing this, to which he received the answer that it was her duty as an acolyte. However, the boy asked the girl to wait as he was still very tense due to his recent training. Sistina wanted to ask what the young man meant, but did not have time, as she fell on top of him. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, slightly lifted the girl and began to apologize to her. But she only closed her eyes, waiting for him to do more. The boy blushed deeply because he saw a girl in front of him who was not indifferent to him. Sistine asked why the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro did not want to do anything with her, but the boy answered that it was not like that at all, which gave the girl hope for a continuation. Having gathered her courage, the acolyte kissed the guy first, who was a little taken aback by such an action. However, having decided to show that the guy also wanted the same thing as the girl, he leaned towards her himself, kissing her many times. After the couple pulled away from each other, the girl said she found it a little difficult to breathe when the boy kissed her. The guy was a little nervous, so he couldn't control himself. Jiro was saying that he understood that it hadn't been that long since they met. The girl interrupted him and continued that the guy wouldn't do anything bad to her. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, hugged his interlocutor tightly and said that she would never hurt the girl, even though he could order her to do anything. The acolyte had no doubt about it. Having settled all the misunderstandings, the couple began kissing again, showing their true feelings for each other. Taking the girl by her interesting places, the guy began to gently touch them. Jiro asked if the girl noticed his glances, to which he received a positive answer. The guy continued asking the girl about her feelings, but she asked the young man to stop touching her interesting places. Recalling his first experience with Hotaru, the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro thought that he could have lasted long enough with another girl. That's why he became better, and now he had no problem doing several things at once. Jiro couldn't even imagine that he could take possession of a girl so quickly, looking into her eyes and giving her his love. The protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro thought about how cute Sistina was, and he promised her that he would treat her very carefully so she could relax. After the boy and girl gave each other love, Sistina fell asleep, and the young man thought about how good he felt. Accidentally touching the girl, Jiro apologized to her for waking her up, but it turned out that Sistina was not asleep. The boy didn't worry about anything anymore, because he was with a girl who cared about him. However, memories of how he spent the night with Hotaru kept popping up in his head. Turning to the girl, the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, finally decided to say that he was just acting spontaneously, so he wondered if everything was okay with her. The girl assured the young man that he had nothing to worry about, because she had not just acquired the art of lovemaking for nothing. She would take care of everything. Jiro realized that the skill his companion had was indeed very useful. After the conversation, Sistine suggested going down to meet Hotaru, to which the young man immediately agreed. The girl sitting at the table saw the couple approaching her and noted that they seemed to be having a good time together. Jiro laughed a little and said that nothing could be hidden from his weapon. Hotaru said that she would return to the room soon, but before that she wanted them to go to the bath again. Coming closer to the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, the girl said that she would remain in her katana form tonight. After bidding farewell to the couple, Hotaru said that she would go to the room first. Sistina was once again left alone with the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, who blushed slightly. Once again in the bathhouse, Sistina was with a young man this time. She offered him to wash him. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, watching how the girl was covered with towels, could not take his eyes off her. The girl was very embarrassed because it was very unusual for her to be in the bathhouse like that. Jiro noted that he liked what he saw in front of him. As he began to wash the boy's back, silence fell in the room. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, thought that they had nothing more to hide from each other. Sistine decided that she would wash the boy completely and began to wipe him from the front, soaping his body. Because the girl was so close, Jiro could not think of anything except the towel that separated them from each other. Unable to resist his desire, the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, suddenly turned to Sistina and grabbed her by the shoulders, saying her name. Deciding that Jiro himself would now wash her, he took a washcloth and began to move his hands over the girl's soapy body, paying attention to all parts of the body. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, completely washed Sistina, who could no longer tolerate what the young man was doing to her. Back in their room, the couple continued to give each other love, but now the leading role was given to Sistina. The girl did everything to please her master, who was only glad to receive something similar from his partner. After the guy couldn't stand it anymore, he allowed himself to relax as much as possible and give in to his feelings. When he finished, the guy hugged the girl who made him feel good, tired. The couple lay exhausted in their bed. Jiro knew that Sistina was very tired, so she fell asleep right away. The young man could not sleep and thought about the art of love that Sistine possessed. Lost in thought, the boy wondered what useful things his skills could do. Remembering one of the skills, Jiro thought that he wanted to try using the magic energy replacement sometime. However, he suddenly felt his body acting strangely because it was too hot. Even though he had given in to his instincts many times, his body still could not calm down. Looking at the girl sleeping next to him, the young man did not know what he should do. He tried to call Sistine, but she did not wake up. Seeing the girl's body again, the boy touched Sistine's form, saying how much he liked it. However, he was immediately interrupted by Hotaru, who hit him on the head to bring him to his senses. The girl scolded the main character Fujinomiya Sojiro, saying that he looked just awful in such a situation, because he did something like that. Hotaru added that tomorrow she would ask the girl to help the guy decide how to handle magic correctly, but for now the acolyte needed to rest. The girl promised to help the young man with the problem that had arisen, and, taking off everything, showed the guy what he wanted to see. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, was glad that Hotaru allowed him to do whatever he wanted. And the next morning, when the young man checked his rank, he noticed that it had increased, and the guy's survivability level had also increased. Sistina didn't expect that Hotaru managed to raise her level so quickly, since hers was already quite high. The girl said that she felt an unusual lightness in her body in the morning. So the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, decided to open her status window to check everything. It turned out that Hotaru's rank had changed from S+ to S++. Sistine couldn't believe what she was seeing. Jiro also noted that all the skills also had a "lof" next to their name. Hotaru also noted that her absorption had also increased. Hearing this, the acolyte became a little embarrassed. Hotaru said that all the changes with her were due to recent events. The guy did not understand what the girl meant. Sistine thought about yesterday. Absorption meant that the girl absorbed the mana of the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, who was the one who helped Hotaru raise his rank. Jiro couldn't even think of something like that. Hotaru noted that Sistina, lying next to him, saw everything, and the girl immediately tried to justify herself. Embarrassed, Sistine looked at Jiro and asked him to love her someday as much as he loved Hotaru. The boy promised. A little later, the boy noticed that Sakura was a little sad, although it was difficult to notice, because she was still an ordinary blade. The boy noted that Sakura regretted something. He could understand her well because the blade had a high absorption capacity. Besides, it was soaked in the boy's blood. Jiro hugged Sakura and told her that she had nothing to worry about, because when Sakura grew up, she too would be able to absorb her master's mana. Hotaru guessed that mana was circulating throughout the boy's entire body, which Sistina confirmed. Magic is about releasing mana from the body and giving it a form, which is how the effect of magic is achieved. People have not always been able to control me, and its quantity is seriously limited. That is why in this world, magic had to be divided into schools and focus on certain ones. The main character Fujinomiya Sojiro understood little of what the girl said, but Hotaru understood everything. So, she decided to set an example. With a wave of her hand, Hotaru created a stream of light under the ceiling of the room, which impressed the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro. Young man decided to try something similar, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't do anything. Sistina was also surprised, because the main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, had more mana than the average person. Hugging the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, Hotaru laughed and told him not to worry about it, since the boy already had cool magic. Leaning towards the boy's ear, Hotaru told him to save his mana and give it to her every evening, as he had been doing recently. Jiro was full of energy, so he said that today they would have to buy equipment, because tomorrow they would have adventures. The girls were also ready for the journey, so the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, handed Sistina her weapon in the form of an axe, and he himself chose to use Sakura and Hotaru. Armed and prepared for the journey, the company went outside to set out. Jiro held a sword in his hands and said that one day he too would be able to receive his true name. The three of them had slept well the night before, knowing they were about to be sent on their first tower takeover. Walking down the street, Sistine found a spot that could help the group get to their destination faster. After greeting the guards, Sistine explained that she was an acolyte who was supposed to go to the tower with her master, so they needed a teleport. Strada opened the door for them. Entering the building, the team was met by a small room with several people standing behind counters. One of the girls greeted the group and said that this place could be used to teleport to the lake town of Ritoku, but the movement was only one way. Noticing the way Jiro was looking at the girl, Sistine coughed, reminding him of why they had come. The girl at the counter explained that in order to return, the company would need to find the same transport hub, but in the city of Ritoku. The ticket cost 1,000 mar. Taking the ticket in his hands, Jiro thought that it looked like some kind of magical stone with an unusual ability. At the same moment, a team of adventurers returned from another expedition and entered the transport hub. Jiro didn't see anything outstanding in the people who entered, so he decided to use his evaluation skill on them. The commander was a warrior named Alexei. He was 32 years old. The battle mage was called Lila. She was 22. The scout was a guy named Garua, who was 26. And the priest's apprentice was a 15-year-old boy named Lucian. Seeing nothing appealing, Jiro merely noted that everyone on the team had a role to play. The trio's peace was interrupted by Garua, who pushed Sojiro aside and offered the girls to join him, leaving the boy behind. However, Sistina and Hotaru quickly refused. The scout tisked and left, and the girls immediately began to think that it wouldn't hurt to teach such a man a lesson for his insolence. However, Jiro didn't pay any attention to such an upstart and went to the room with a teleport, accompanied by his ladies. Sistina explained that they would teleport to the same room, only the sign under the door would change. The girl asked no one to move until they saw that the sign had changed. The young man understood everything, so Sistina said that they would immediately go to another city, Retoku. After the transfer, the people found themselves on top of one of the towers, from where an impressive view of the city opened up. The city of Retoku was indeed located next to a large lake. The city was small but very beautiful, which Jiro immediately noticed. Upon arriving at the new location, the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, said that their adventure could finally be considered begun, as they had to go to the tower. Having found the right place, the company immediately went inside the tower so as not to waste time. Going forward, they saw that the enemy was waiting for them. Jiro decided to see what his acolyte was capable of, so he told her to show Sistine what she could do in a fight. The girl immediately attacked the monsters, but Hotaru did not understand why she was doing this and decided to help her. However, to the surprise of the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro, the girl did nothing else and just stood there, closing her eyes, not reacting to anything. Jiro became a little worried and asked Hotaru what Sistina was doing, but the girl assured him that everything was fine. After the acolyte waited for one of the monsters to attack her, she opened her eyes and was able to attack. The girl deftly wielded her new weapon and delivered a blow which she called 8 lights. Sistine exhaled and felt a little disappointed that she hadn't been able to demonstrate her abilities very well. However, Hotaru praised the girl, and Jiro said that it was dangerous and he was worried about Sistina. The young man asked why the girl let the monster get so close to her, to which he replied that otherwise he could have dodged her attack and counterattacked himself. Hotaru decided to distribute the roles in their small group. Sistina said that she had the skills Self-Defense and Guardian, so counterattack was suitable for her. Because the acolyte had made a contract, she had gained a lot of strength, so she needed to restrain herself better. The young man was impressed by what the girl said and was about to rush towards her, but Hotaru stopped him. The girl decided that it was necessary to check how the protagonist Fujinomiya Sojiro would behave against the monster, so she led him in a different direction. Coming out into a more spacious place, the young man noted that there was much more space in this room than in the previous one. Jiro said that he tried to roughly estimate the tower. I counted 3 floors in it, but inside it was very different. The guy also noticed that all the windows in the tower faced the entrance. Sistina noted that the towers were poorly studied, so they kept many mysteries. Each level had its own boss, who guarded the passage to the next level. However, even after defeating him, he appeared again and again. On the top floor of the tower is the Tower Lord, after defeating whom the building will be destroyed. Such towers were called hierarchical, because from the first level onwards, the monsters become stronger and stronger. To move to the next level, it is enough for one of the squad to do so. The main character, Fujinomiya Sojiro, decided to ask what the meaning of the existence of all these towers was. Sistina wanted to answer, but she was interrupted by a loud wheeze. Hotaru advised Jiro to remain calm and fight using the techniques they had trained earlier. The young man obeyed and looked at his enemy. It was a level 1 tower wolf and a G rank. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, held 2 blades in front of him. The young man thought that he was fighting only to become stronger, but fighting against the monster was different from fighting against bandits. When the wolf went on the offensive, Hotaru warned the boy to be careful, but after the wolf ran up to her, she gave it to him, saying that she was not his opponent. Jiro knew that the enemy could not be allowed to remain behind, so he decided to attack him from the front. The wolf was not stupid, so he jumped back after he saw the young man rushing at him with a sword. Sistine screamed that the wolf would now attack the guy on the left. Without time to react, Jiro fell to the floor from the blow of the monster, which was now on top of him. The wolf bit the protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, on the arm, and the young man himself was enveloped in fear. He did not know what to do next. That's why Hotaru was already coming to his aid. The girl quickly chased the wolf away from the boy, kicking the monster with 1 foot, after which she told Sistine to distract the enemy, but not to kill him. Hotaru approached the boy and asked what was difficult about the fight. The boy answered that the wolf was not at all like the dog from the previous world. The girl touched the hand in which Jiro held the sword and said that they must change his thinking. As Sistine said earlier, monsters sometimes attack people. However, these were monsters that were not defeated inside the tower. Jiro understood that such monsters, if they met a person on their way, would immediately attack him. The girl explained that they kill not even for food or protection, but simply without any sense. All demons are evil and do not require pity. The young man understood what Hotaru was talking about. Having pulled himself together, the guy finally realized who he was fighting against. The girl, seeing his serious attitude, noted that the guy had finally become determined. Jiro approached the acolyte and thanked her, saying that now they could switch. Sistina wished the boy luck in the fight. The protagonist, Fujinomiya Sojiro, looked at his opponent and noted that the beast growled a lot because it was angry that it could not win. Hearing this, the monster got angry and rushed towards the guy. Waiting until the wolf grabbed 1 blade with its teeth, Jiro distracted it so he could strike with the other sword. Gathering all his strength, Jiro directed them into a strike against the beast, realizing that all evil must be destroyed completely. A large, dark monster with an open mouth attacked the main character. The main character manages to put his blade in front of him. The monster slams its mouth shut along with the blade. The protagonist looks ahead with a serious look and swings his blade. He cuts the monster in flight. It pours over the protagonist with an open mouth. The protagonist, having completed the blow, stands in a fighting pose, silently leaning forward, gritting his teeth. Hotaru and Sistina were standing outside. Sistina raised her hands to her face and said that he moved differently than before. Hotaru folded her hands under her chest. They were covered by a piece of her dress. She closed her eyes and agreed with Sistina. Hotaru looked at the protagonist. He also looked at her and smiled. She thought that he was a very interesting guy. The protagonist ran up to Hotarumaru and put his hands on her shoulders. She wondered why he was looking at her like that. The protagonist cheerfully replied that he was grateful to her and that she was a good fighter. The protagonist grabbed Hotaru's hands with both hands and shook them. Then he told her that his victory was only due to her. Hotaru let go of the protagonist's hands. She came closer to the protagonist's face. She began to whisper to him he could thank her at night. The protagonist was surprised by what he heard, and a slight blush of embarrassment appeared on his face. Sistina, holding a weapon in her hands, walked away from the boys and said that there was something lying here. Then she stretched out her hands to the boys and showed them a stone lying in her palms. She said that this was all that was left of the monster. The boys were surprised when they saw the stone. Sistina approached Hotaru and asked him to give her his left hand. Hotaru raised his hand. Sistina's hands touched his. Light began to emanate from them. It was she who, with the help of magic, healed the wounds that the monster inflicted on him during the fight. Sistina smiled sweetly and looked at the protagonist. The protagonist thanked her for healing the wounds on his hands. She replied that she was always ready to help with the treatment, but it would still be better not to get wounded in battle. The protagonist approached Sistina's face and said that he would give her a special thank you in the evening. A slight blush appeared on Sistina's face from the offer she heard, and she was displaced. The protagonist hugged the two girls and shouted that everything was fine and that they would have a great evening today. Hotaru smiled sweetly in the protagonist's embrace. Sistine felt awkward. Hotaru held a sword in her hands, which began to emit an unusual light. Then she said that it was time for them to continue on their way. Hotaru and the main hero turned around and saw two monsters just like that wolf approaching them from around the corner. Hotaru looked ahead and said that Sistina was in the vanguard. Sistina rushed into battle. She had a weapon in her hands. Behind her, the protagonist stood next to Hotaru. The protagonist began to take out his sword. Sistina began to strike one of the monsters. Then the protagonist, swinging his weapon in mid-flight, rushed to finish off the monster. Hotaru was telling the boys how to behave in battle during the fight. The monster wanted to attack the main character, but he managed to dodge the attack in time. Hotaru stood nearby and shouted that she would prompt the guys until they got used to the fight. The main character activates his ability. Plus rating and the characteristics of two monsters appear in front of him. Mad Wolves, G and H rank, and one armed stone golem, G rank. Hotaru, armed with a sword, went into battle. She said that now was the time to arrange a hunt. Sistina stood nearby. She held a weapon in her hands and nervously turned to Hotaru. Sistina and the protagonist looked at each other and laughed. The fight began when the sun was high. After a while, night came and the fight continued. Hotaru fixed her hair and said that, finally, the fight was over. The protagonist looked away and said that they had defeated everyone on this level. The boys were standing in the room when a blond man appeared behind them. He said that the boys could come to him. The main character activates his ability to evaluate this man. He is Will Mark Bates, a 34-year-old banker. The boys stood and looked at Bates. Will introduced himself and whispered to the girls that this man was suspicious. Sistine noticed the rings on the man. Bates opened the ring case. There were several rings with stones in it. Bates knelt down and showed the rings. Sistine came up to him and said that they needed command rings, the same as the adventurers had. Bates replied that he had those rings. He showed two rings and said that these rings with a black stone, it was one big stone that was divided, but it still remains connected to its parts. Sistina asked if it helps much. Bates took the ring in his hands. Bates took a few rings in his hands and closed his eyes. He imagined the guys who were lost. Then he said that with these stones, even if the guys are in the tower, they can always find out where your partner with the same ring is. The protagonist and Hotaru also approached the suitcase and began to examine the rings. Sistina looked at the man and asked how much 3 rings would cost. The man happily replied that for them it would only be 300,000 maras. At that very moment, when the boys heard the price of the rings, they stood up and began to walk away from Bates. Bates began waving his hands and begging the boys to stay. Bates turned to Sistina. He asked that she was an acolyte. Sistina stopped. Sistine turned around and saw Bates holding 3 rings in his hands and saying that he wanted to give these rings to her. Bites bowed his head and said that this gift would be an investment. He wanted to make a contract with them. He needed help. The protagonist approached Sistine and asked to show him the contract. Sistina showed a paper with many letters. The protagonist began to read it. What is written there? The protagonist thinks that he will use this contract as a profit and will not limit Sistina. Sistine closed her eyes and said that they agreed to fulfill the contract, and if Bites broke it, she swears that she will punish him. The protagonist's mouth fell open in shock. Sistina smiled. She was happy with the agreement. The protagonist shouted that Sistina would be punished when they returned home. Night fell. The moon was full. Sistina lay on the bed without clothes. Hotaru stroked Sistine's head and said that they were really a team. Will was lying on the bed, with the girls on either side. He said that tomorrow the three of them could go to the tower again. The protagonist looked to the side where a sword was lying. The protagonist took his sword. He began to rub his face against the sword and said that of course he relies on it too. Morning came. The sun was shining on the roofs of the houses. The protagonist looked at the sword. He activated his ability on the sword and realized that the sword and Sakura also increases its characteristics during their battles. Hotaru stood next to him and extended her hand to him. Hotaru's hand. She said that this was the protagonist's skill, additional training. The protagonist stretched out his sword in front of him and shouted the word sharpening. The quality of the sword increased by 50. The protagonist rubbed his face against the sword and said that the sword, Sakura, will be an excellent magic blade. To go to the next floor of the tower, they need to become stronger. The girls stood next to each other and smiled, looking at the protagonist. The protagonist raised his clenched fist up and said that today they had to go through another floor. It was time for them to move on. The girls stood next to the protagonist. The main character and the girls went out into the street. They turned around, noticing a large crowd of people. One of the people was trying to get through the crowd. It was Bites. He noticed the main character and said that something bad had happened and he needed help. Bites stood with a suitcase in his hands, leaning his hands on his legs. He was trying to catch his breath. Sistina came up to him. She was interested in what happened to Bites. The guys started looking at each other after Bites' words. He said that the first level was empty. Bites turned to see two people talking. One of them was going to go to the tower, and the other was trying to dissuade him. The protagonist and the girls began to discuss what could have happened in the tower. Hotaru put her hand to her chin and said that they had exterminated everyone yesterday. Hotaru folded her arms under her chest and said that most likely the monsters had not had time to recover after yesterday's battle. Bites replied that this was fine, but there was another problem. He witnessed people entering the tower, but they returned from there barely alive. He heard that there were expeditions up to the 10th level. The guys listened attentively to Bites. Sistine folded her arms and said that they needed to go help. Bites replied that 10 groups had not returned yet, but the monsters were mixed up on the 2nd to 8th floors. Based presented a dark well. He said that the closer to the center of the head axis, the stronger the monsters and fewer escape routes. Most likely many groups are pressed to the center and thus blocked. The man looked at Sistina and said that he intended to call an experienced group. All that was left was to wait for them to arrive. Sistina put her hand on her chest and said that they could go and help. Hotaru hugged her and said that they were ready to help. The protagonist closed his eyes and said that they would not go anywhere, even if they were partly responsible for it. The girls began to persuade him. The girls looked at the main character. He said that he had nothing more important than them. Sistine took up arms and said that then she would go to the tower alone. The protagonist stood in front of her and said that he would not allow this. She said that then the contract would have to be rewritten. The protagonist remembered the confused image of Sistina and the words that the main rule is that the power of the acolyte should be used only for the sake of the owner. The protagonist closed his eyes. Beads of sweat appeared on his face. The protagonist took Sistina by the hand and pulled her along. He said that this was not good, so the three of them would go to the tower. The protagonist turned around and said that he couldn't let Sistine go to the tower alone, as she was very important to him. Sistina threw herself into the protagonist's arms and thanked him. Hotaru came over and said that it was all very sweet. The protagonist smiled. The protagonist and Sistina hugged each other. The protagonist said that Sistina should not overdo it. Sistina agreed with the words of the protagonist. The protagonist thought that he wanted to protect the people close to him. The main character and the girls headed towards the tower. The guys noticed that the tower had changed a lot during the night. Even the air around it had changed. A gloomy atmosphere reigned around the tower. The main character, armed with 2 blades, shouted loudly. He rushed into battle against the monsters, namely the wolf and the insect. He struck the monsters with blades. Sistina stabbed one of the monsters with her axe. Sistina and the protagonist approached each other and gave each other high fives in honor of defeating the monsters. The protagonist thought that at this rate they would be able to handle the monsters. Hotaru shouted that it was too early to relax. The protagonist and Sistina turned around at Hotaru's scream. She looked ahead and said that the monsters were already coming here. 3 monsters called Tower Fang appear in front of them. 2 G-rank monsters, 1 E-rank fire monster. The protagonist and Hotaru rushed into battle. The protagonist asked Hotaru if they could handle the 2 monsters. Hotaru replied that she would handle the monsters on the sides, and the protagonist and Sistina would distract the monster in the center. Hotaru, armed with a sword, rushed into battle with the G-rank monsters. The protagonist and Sistina headed in the other direction. Hotaru began to strike at the monsters. The protagonist, holding 2 blades in his hands, looked at the E-rank monster and thought that he needed to remain calm and protect Sistina. He would go on the offensive in the vanguard. Sistina stood nearby in a fighting pose with a weapon in her hands. Sistina stood in a fighting pose. She stretched out her axe in front of her and said that she was starting the attack. While Sistina was distracting the monster, the protagonist ran to the side. He thought that the monster's back was completely open. Suddenly, the monster began to roar and headed towards the protagonist. The monster jumped on the protagonist and knocked him to the ground. The protagonist put his blades in front of him to defend himself from the monster. The protagonist was shocked by the monster's sudden attack. The monster loomed over the protagonist. It growled loudly and tried to bite the protagonist. The protagonist thought that the monster had figured out his plan and rushed to attack him. The monster was too strong. If this continued, the protagonist would lose strong. If this continued, the protagonist would lose. The monster tried to bite the protagonist. Sistine appears and hits the monster's face with her weapon. She screams that the monster should leave her master, the protagonist. The monster makes a strange sound and flies off to the wall. The protagonist stands up next to Sistina. She asks the protagonist if he is okay. The protagonist wipes his face with his hand and replies that he is okay, and that he is grateful to Sistina for saving him. The monster stands up and growls. The boys decided that while the monster was wounded, they needed to finish it off. They jumped up and rushed into battle. At that moment, Hotaru started shouting at the boys that they needed to be careful because the monster could attack with fire breath. Hearing Hotaru's words, the protagonist was frightened. The monster began to spit fire from its mouth, which headed towards Sistina. The protagonist covers Sistina with his body, and they fall to the ground. The protagonist's back was attacked by the monster's fire. Sistina looms over the protagonist and says in a panic that she must heal him. At that moment, Hotaru flies towards the monster and kicks it. Sistina turns around in panic and looks at Hotaru, who attacks the monster. The protagonist is lying on the ground. His back is all burned. Sistina is sitting next to him. Her weapon is lying on the floor. Hotaru jumped away not far from the guys, turned around and shouted that Sistina will take care of the treatment later. First, we need to deal with this monster. Sistina took the weapon in her hands. She turned to the protagonist and said that she would be back soon and left. The protagonist wanted to get up, but he couldn't do it because of the pain. He thought that this was really another world. He really could be hurt. The protagonist was writhing in pain. Beads of sweat were appearing on his face. A man appeared behind him who said that the protagonist was okay. He could have avoided this fire attack of the monster in time. The stranger turned out to be a girl in armor, with a sword hanging on her belt behind her. She lifted the main character up and said that there was a shelter nearby, that it would be safest. The main character listened to her silently. The stranger dragged the main character along a long corridor with small windows. He thought that it turns out that there are places in the tower where enemies cannot get. The protagonist gets into a room where there are people. The girl said that she asks for forgiveness, but there is little space here. Plus, they have already used up all the restorative medicines. The protagonist thought that Sistina would be glad to see these people. Sistina rushed into battle. Sistina swung her hammer at the monster's head, sending it crashing to the ground. The blow so powerful that shards of earth flew in all directions. Hotaru swung her hammer and chopped off one of the monster's paws. Hotaru looked at the monster and said that it was too weak. Hotaru dropped one of the daggers on the floor next to her leg. The monster got angry and rushed towards Hotaru with a roar. Sistina held her weapon in her hands and shouted that the monster was heading towards Hotaru. Hotaru managed to notice the monster's attack. Hotaru has a second blade in her hands, and it flies towards the monster's mouth. Hotaru ends up under the monster. With one blade, she pierces the monster's mouth. With the second, its belly. Hotaru pulls the blades out of the monster. It falls to the ground. Hotaru ran forward, her weapon in her hands. She told Sistina that it was time for them to return to the protagonist. Sistina ran after her. Hotaru held the protagonist's blade in her hands, and she said that the blade was Sakura who saved her. She believes the blade wants to quickly transform and help the protagonist. Sistina calling him. He was lying on her lap. She was healing his back with magic. He looked at Sistina. She was glad that he woke up. The protagonist continued to lie on Sistina's lap. She hugged him and said that the protagonist was stupid, since he got hurt very badly when he was protecting her. The protagonist, lying on his knees, thought that Sistina's breastplate was very hard. Sistina let go of the protagonist. She pressed her hand to her chest and looked away. Then she said that she should have gotten this wound. The protagonist tried to get up and said that Sistina was saying the wrong things. The protagonist sat in front of her. He smiled and said that Sistina could heal his wounds because she herself remained intact. He was grateful to her for the healing. Outerwear. The protagonist fell to the ground. There was a large hole on his back from the fire monster's attack. Sistine said that the protagonist would have to be patient. Now she would take off his clothes. The protagonist winced in pain and thought that his skin was coming off with his clothes. Sistina began pouring water from a flask onto the almost healed back of the protagonist. The protagonist shrank and said that his wounds were burning, but it seemed to be getting better. Sistina held the bottle in her hands and said that this would not have happened if it were not for her selfishness. There were men sitting in front of the protagonist. The protagonist turned around and said that if it weren't for Sistina, they wouldn't have been able to find all these people, and she should be happy about that. In Sistina's eyes, she smiled and agreed with the words of the protagonist. Hotaru walked up to the protagonist and called him. She then handed him a stone. She said that the protagonist needed to look at this. It was a magical stone that was left over from the previous monster. The protagonist was shirtless. He held a stone in his hands and said that it was a B-rank magic stone. How could such things fall from a monster on the 7th floor? Sistina and Hotaru sat on either side of the protagonist. The girl who brought the protagonist to the shelter said that the protagonist's words were true. What he was holding in his hands was called the mutant's magic stone. The protagonist looked at her and asked what mutant meant, and who this girl was. Sistina was treating the back of the protagonist. Hotaru was sitting next to them. The protagonist turned to the girl sitting in front of her, that it was she who saved him then. The girl approached the main character and told him that he needed to wait. First, you should ask that the protagonist does not consider her one of the mutants because she is a woman, an adventurer. Sistina continued to treat the protagonist's back. The main character thought, and looking at the girl, he began to say that he thought that finding such a sweet girl like her was a unique event in itself. The girl sat opposite the main character. She put her hand on her chest and was surprised by his words. The main character thought about the words. The girl blushed and waved it off. Then she said that apparently the main character had already fully recovered, since he could joke about her like that. The girl was sitting on the lap of the protagonist. Behind him were Sistina and Hotaru. The protagonist answered the girl that he was not joking. The girl was embarrassed. She blushed and looked away. Then she said that she was grateful. The girl turned away in embarrassment and thought that the last time she was called, that was when she was 6 years old. The main character looked at the girl and said that she could tell about the mutant's magic stone. The girl was thinking about something, but the main character attracted her attention with noise. She came to her senses. Her face was red from embarrassment, and she was ready to tell about the monster. The girl remembered the appearance of a large monster with claws and said that the fire fang usually appears on the 7th floor. The protagonist thought that his assessment showed the same fact that the girl was talking about. Recalling the fight between the protagonist and the monster, she continued to say that the monster the boys met was very strong. It could only be found on the 10th floor, and even then it was a great rarity. The main character held the stone in his hands. The girl put her hands together and continued to say that these monsters leave behind these stones. They are very valuable, and if you meet one of these monsters, many immediately run away. But not everyone succeeds. Sistina peeked out from behind the protagonist and said that she had finished treating his back. The protagonist held his shoulder with one hand and turned to Sistina and thanked her. The men sitting nearby were alarmed. The stranger asked Sistina that she could treat the other men so that they could at least walk. Sistina said that she agreed to fulfill the request and was ready to begin the treatment. The protagonist looked at the girl and asked her name. The girl smiled and said that she was Frey. She was exploring the area of the 4th floor, but she was here as an escort. The protagonist activated his abilities and saw her characteristics. The protagonist said that he wanted to ask Frey if she could take the others with her and escape from this place. They had dealt with most of the monsters. Frey leaned over a little and said that she would do it and wanted to hear his name. The protagonist sat on the ground and threw a magic stone up. He introduced himself as Frey. Hotaru was sitting next to the protagonist. Frey said that she would definitely thank him for his help. The protagonist replied that she had nothing to worry about. The next moment, Hotaru presses the protagonist's face to his chest. He was surprised by her action. Hotaru hugged the protagonist and said that they had already talked too much about the magic stone. He should not provoke her jealousy any further. The protagonist asked Hotaru to stop acting like that. He then turned around and looked at the blonde man sitting nearby. The protagonist looked at the man and thought that he needed to be more careful with this man. A blonde man was hitting Freya on the head with a small stick. They were talking about something. The protagonist thought that this man was the one who hired her as an escort. The blonde man started grabbing Frey by the hair and yelling that she didn't understand what he was talking about. Frey started screaming in pain. The man then grabbed Frey by an interesting body part and began to beat her with a stick. He shouted that she should not forget her place. Frey was frightened and blushed. She looked down and asked this man for forgiveness. The protagonist grabs the man's hand, which holds a stick. Frey sits on his knees in front of the man, and the people around him watch what is happening. The protagonist squeezes and lifts the man's hand up and says that this man had better get out of this place as soon as possible. The man's stick falls out of his hand. The protagonist lets go of the man's hand, and he starts to run away in fear. The protagonist sits down next to Frey and asks about her condition. She covers her body with her hands and looks nervously at the running man. Frey's eyes fill with tears, and the protagonist extends his hand to her. She lowers her head, her hair covering her face. Frey replies that she doesn't need help and can get up on her own. Frey started to leave through a small gorge together with the rest of the people. She was the last one, and before entering the gorge, she turned around. The main character was standing next to the girls and thought that Frey was most likely this man's slave. Hotaru folded her arms under her chest and asked the protagonist that they had achieved their goal and what they would do next. The protagonist looked away and thought. Next to the protagonist stood Sistina. She looked at him and said that they had done enough, including saving many people, and that it was time for them to leave. Sistina looked ahead and smiled nervously. The protagonist stretched out his hand and asked Hotaru if she felt the presence of other people in the tower. She replied that there were several people near the boss area. The protagonist offered to go help them. Sistina put her hand on her chest. Then she closed her eyes and said plaintively that there was no need to go anywhere. They had already done a lot. She was wrong when she asked the main character to go help. Hotaru looked at the protagonist and waited for the decision he would make. Sistina's eyes. She was in shock when she heard the main character. He turned his back and said that leaving this place would be a bad idea. Now was not the time for it. The protagonist looked at Sistina. She was holding a weapon in her hands. Her legs began to shake. The protagonist thought that she was worried about his safety and was afraid of losing him and Hotaru. He could not let her escape while she was in this state. Sistina perked up when she heard her name. Hotaru called her. She looked at Sistina and told her that she needed to stop acting like she was a stranger to them. Sistina listened attentively to the boys with her mouth slightly open. Hotaru said that if Sistina were in the boy's place, she would do the same. She was acting spoiled. The protagonist laughed and replied that he would not go so far as to spoil Sistina. Sistina timidly walked a few steps forward and found herself in front of the main character. She stood with her head down and said something quietly. The guy said that Sistina needed to speak louder, otherwise she couldn't be heard. Sistina put her hand on her chest and said that she wanted to save those people. The guy should help her do it. The protagonist answered her that they would definitely do it. Sistina blushed when she heard the words of support from the protagonist. She stretched her hand forward. Sistina, the protagonist, and Hotaru held hands. Hotaru said that they could go. The protagonist nodded in response to Hotaru. Sistina smiled and agreed with the guys. Hotaru walked ahead and said that she thought that this entire area belonged to the Fire Fang. There were no other monsters nearby. The protagonist followed Hotaru and looked around. Behind them, Sistina came out of the passage in the wall. Hotaru turned back and said that there was a possibility of finding the surviving adventurers without having to fight. Hotaru looked away as something caught her attention. Hotaru turned around. She tensed up and said that she just felt some kind of monster ahead. She jumped up and ran forward. She called the guys to follow her. Hotaru ran, her dress fluttering from the speed. She said that they could still make it. The boys rushed forward after Hotaru. The boys saw a corridor and a fork to the right and left. From there came cries for help. Hotaru clenched her teeth and said that she thought they were too late. Sistina ran next to her and answered that she was sure that they would still make it in time to help. The boys ran to a dead end of one of the corridors. They saw a black monster standing on its hind legs and moving towards a man who was sitting on the floor and trying to defend himself with a sword. Behind him were several more wounded people. The main character ran forward and shouted that they had found survivors and that they would still have time to save them. Hotaru was in the air. She had a sword in her hands. She shouted that they need to deal with this monster. The protagonist moved next to her. He held a blade in one hand. With the other, he intends to free the sword. Sistina, armed, also rushed at the monist. The protagonist sees the monster's characteristics. It is a hidden bear of the 12th floor. Its rank is equal to rank F. The black bear, with an open mouth, turns to Hotaru. She ends up right under the bear. He covers her with his carcass. Hotaru strikes, but misses the bear. The protagonist, seeing this, is very surprised. He does not understand how the bear could dodge Hotaru's attack. The main character held a blade and a sword in his hands and rushed to attack. He stops next to Hotaru. In front of them, there are only wounded people. The protagonist looks ahead. He is in shock and does not understand how a bear can just take and disappear. The protagonist begins to carefully examine all the corners of the corridor after Hotaru's words. She said that now is not the time to be surprised. The bear uses camouflage. The protagonist needs to move to the left and stay on guard. The protagonist crossed his arms and replied that he understood. A moment later, the protagonist crashes back into the wall from a blow delivered by a large bear paw. The protagonist begins to cough in pain. The protagonist ends up on the ground. Hotaru appears in front of him. She covers him and says that the bear, in addition to the wall of flowers, is also able to erase its presence. The protagonist gritted his teeth in pain. Beads of sweat appeared on his face. Hotaru defended herself with her sword and said that the protagonist should not focus on one place. He should watch the entire space. The protagonist wipes his face with his hand and thinks that this hidden bear can be compared to some kind of ninja. The blade in his hand, the protagonist began to make a melody. The protagonist thought that Sakura was getting too excited. But why was this happening now? The protagonist stands up. Hattori shouts from behind that a bear is approaching from the right. The protagonist extends his weapon in front of him. The spatial warp spell is triggered. The walls in front of the protagonist begin to move. The main character jumps up and the floor on which he was previously standing explodes. Fragments of stone fly in different directions. A huge hole appeared in the floor. The protagonist looked ahead. He was exhausted from this fight, but a clearing appeared in his head. Hotaru deflected the blows that were aimed at her. She jumped aside and defended herself. Seeing all this, the main hero thought that he sees how space is deformed while the bear is moving. The main hero has a chance to attack. The bear's translucent silhouette was barely visible against the wall. He continued to fight Hotaru. The protagonist noticed him and rushed to attack. The protagonist jumps up. Hotaru ends up underneath him. The protagonist, hanging in the air, begins to strike at the bear. Hotaru stands nearby and watches the battle. The bear appears in his guise in front of the protagonist, who in turn thinks and mentally calls on Sakura. The protagonist and Hotaru strike the bear. The protagonist is in the air. Hotaru is behind the bear. The parts of the bear cut off by the boys fly into the air. The bear falls to the floor. Its head and one of its paws roll away. The protagonist ends up on the ground. Sistina heals the people who were previously wounded in the battle. The protagonist looks at Hotaru. He laughs and says that they did a good job. He managed to cut off the bear's paw, and Hotaru managed to decapitate it. The protagonist then looks at his blade, Sakura, and thanks her. The main character held a sword in his hands. He thought to himself that the bad man's sword couldn't even scratch this bear. The protagonist wants to come up with a name for the sword. The protagonist thought about it and twirled the sword in front of him. The protagonist sheathed his weapon and walked up to Hotaru. She turned to Sistine and asked if she could tell how the injured people were feeling. Sistina was sitting on the floor. She turned around and said that they managed to save 2 people. On the ground next to Sistina sat the girl Ari and the guy Thor. They thanked the main character and the girls for saving them. The protagonist stood in front of the survivors and asked that they managed to save only 2 people. Ari and Thor looked away. They whined sadly about what was happening. Sistine looked to the side, and then everyone else looked there too. The protagonist saw a wounded man with deep cuts and torn armor. A man with a bandaged head sat against the wall in silence. Hotaru approached the protagonist. She put her hand on the protagonist's shoulder and said that they had not managed to save him. The boys looked at the motionless man, and Hotaru continued to say that perhaps the boys would have been able to save their friend if they had come earlier, but that was unlikely, since his wounds were too deep. Thor closed his eyes and said that Baku had risked his life to save them, and that he and Ari were the only ones alive thanks to him. Ari stood next to him, shaking with fear. Thor's hand was clenched into a fist and began to shake. Thor spread his arms out to the side, shaking from the shock. He imagined a huge black monster and said that the boss of this floor was to blame for everything. Thor's eyes filled with tears. He said that he had never met such a monster, never even heard of such a thing. Ari took Thor's hand. They called each other by name. Thor placed his hands on Ari's shoulders and told her that he would protect her. She needed to stop acting recklessly in order to protect him. Thor started to cry. He wasn't ready to lose Ari. The protagonist stood next to Hotaru and looked at her. Hotaru looked at the boys and thought that their behavior was selfish. They need to look out for each other to get out of here in one piece. But if Thor wants to protect Ari himself, he needs to be stronger. The protagonist looked down, then looked at Hotaru and thought that she was thinking logically. She was also thinking about him and Sistina. Hotaru looked at the protagonist. He said that he just said his thoughts out loud. She mentally responded negatively. Hotaru looked at the protagonist and said that, most likely, a conversation between them would be possible with the help of a combination of communication and unity of feelings. In front of them, Thor, Ari, and Sistina were trying to shift the man. The protagonist replied that her voice is transmitted through communication and his thoughts are transmitted through the unities of feelings. Hotaru approached the protagonist and told him that it was an image rather than a sound that was being transmitted, and that they could now communicate in secret from everyone. Ari bowed before the protagonist and Hotaru. She thanked him for saving her once again. Thor stood next to her. Hotaru asked if the guys took their artifacts. Thor looked at Ari and said that they were only able to take what was currently on them, and the rest was left in the boss room. Ari was fidgeting with her cracked armor. Hotaru and the others went ahead. She said that it was time for them to leave. The protagonist turned around to look at the body of the man left behind. Thor walked behind Ari, her legs still shaking. Thor's eyes filled with tears again, and he said that it was hard for him to think that his friend and good warrior Baku would end up being consumed by a monster or a tower. The protagonist came up to him from behind and asked him to repeat his words about the tower. Sistine got ahead of Thor and said that the remains of the people who died in the tower would be eaten by the monster or the tower itself. The protagonist was dumbfounded by what he heard. He clenched his fist following Sistina and thought that they were just a nutrient that was walking around inside the stomach of the tower. The protagonist heard Hotaru calling him in his mind. Walking ahead, Hotaru mentally asked the main hero to come to her. She also added that he should not worry. There were no monsters behind. The protagonist approached Hotaru and asked her why she had called him. She looked ahead and said that she thought the protagonist would want to deal with it personally. The guys looked ahead at the long corridor. Kotaru said that someone was approaching and that this creature was alone. It was now around the corner. Frey appeared from around the corner of the long corridor. She walked with a smile on her face and called the main character. The main character. The main character, seeing Frey, smiled. He would be glad to see her. The protagonist was curious why Frey returned to the tower. Frey put her hand to her chest and said that she came to help her savior. The others had already safely gotten out of the tower. The protagonist smiled, standing in front of Frey. He said that in fact it was Frey who saved him. Hotaru stood next to him and looked at the protagonist. Frey smiled and answered that she just wanted to help them. Would the protagonist allow her to do so? The protagonist looked ahead and replied that he accepted Frey's help and was counting on it. He thought that since Frey had come to their aid, they would have to get out of the tower together. Hotaru walked in front. Behind were Thor and the limping Ari. Then came Sistina, the protagonist, and behind them all was Frey, who made sure that no one attacked them from behind. Hotaru looked at the protagonist. He mentally asked her what she thought, if they would fight again before leaving the tower. Hotaru replied that there would most likely be a battle, and at least once. The protagonist spread out and looked away. The protagonist raised his hand and told Frey that if they were to fight together, they would need to learn how each of them fought. Frey walked alongside, agreeing with the protagonist's words. The protagonist looked at the girls and said that Sistine specializes in defense, so she acts as a tank. Hotaru is the strongest of his team, so she specializes in attack. The main character started to smile, and continued to say that he is more of a scout. He is not strong in combat skills, so his skills leave much to be desired. Frey started waving her hands and asking the protagonist that he was probably joking. She saw how he fought masterfully and attacked with his weapon. It couldn't be that the protagonist's words were true. The protagonist thought that he had overdone it and revealed his abilities. He looked at Frey and said that his skills were improving due to training with Hotaru. Frey responded that it seemed that the protagonist had a good teacher. Frey looked at the protagonist's trousers. The main character noticed this and covered his pants with his hands. Then he asked her why she was looking at his interesting place on his body. Frey was embarrassed. She blushed and turned away, then said that she was looking at his unusual weapon. The protagonist looked at her. The main character got into a fighting pose and started waving his arms, then said that he fights with two, mood and swings them in different directions during the fight. She needs to remember this and be more careful. Frey replied that she understood him. Frey walked next to her and did not take her eyes off the weapon that she saw on the belt of the main character. He looked away and thought that it seemed he managed to deceive her. The protagonist stands up and starts covering his pants. He said through laughter that Frey keeps looking at his interesting body part. Frey nervously screamed that he was wrong, and she was just looking at his weapon. The protagonist took one of the swords in his hands and said that Frey was really so interested in his weapon. The protagonist also thought that she was interested in Saruka. He wants to lie to Frey again. Holding the sword, Chief, the hero said that he was born in a remote village. This sword is passed down from generation to generation. Frey replied that she had never seen such swords before. The protagonist stretched out his hand towards Frey and said that his house was attacked by bandits and his parents were sent to a better world, so she had never seen such swords. The protagonist thought that in fact only he was dealt with then. Frey lowered her head and said that the protagonist had a hard time too. She didn't want to remind him of the bad. The protagonist thought that Frey was a good girl. Then he asked her that she mentioned the word too. What could it mean? Frey turned to the protagonist and said that she did not want to tell the details of her misfortune, so she would tell it briefly. She lowered her head and continued to say that her parents were also dead. They left her alone with her sick brother. Frey cringed and remembered how badly she had been treated by the man she had been accompanying. She went on to say that her story was not surprising. A story like this could be heard around every corner. The protagonist approached Frey and said that he was interested in what happened to the gentleman who raised his hand against her. This could also be considered a common sad story. Frey turned away, looked down and answered the protagonist's question positively. The boys continued walking. Frey stretched out her hand in front of her and said that she was grateful to the main character for standing up for her. Hotaru had a bad feeling. She stopped. The other guy stopped behind her. She mentally told the protagonist that the monsters were already here. They had appeared too suddenly. At this rate, they would take them in a pincer movement. Hotaru looked ahead and mentally told the protagonist that, in that case, they would have to split their forces. The protagonist was serious. He understood what Hotaru was talking about. Frey looked at the protagonist in surprise, and then asked him why he had pulled out both swords. The protagonist stood with his back to Sistina, and said that monsters were approaching them from the front and from behind. Sistina, having armed herself, answered that she understood him. Sistina ran away shouting that as soon as she finished, she would be right back. The protagonist and the guys need to be careful. They should not move. Thor and Frey did not understand the meaning of Sistina's words. The protagonist called Frey with him. The guy said that it seemed like monsters were approaching from behind. Frey looked to the side. She did not immediately understand what was happening. From around the corner of the corridor, squeaking monsters were approaching them. G rank and a human ant of F rank were approaching the guys. Frey noticed the monsters and said that if this was a human ant, then things were bad for them. Frey and the protagonist stood armed in front of the monsters. Frey shouted that they needed to be more careful, because the Ant-Man could command the tower ants. The protagonist was tense. He didn't know who to start the fight with, the soldier or the general. Frey took the blade in her hands. The protagonist, armed with swords, looked at Frey and said that she needed to distract the attention of the three ants to herself. Frey was surprised by the protagonist's request. The protagonist pulled one of the swords in front of him and said that he in turn would deal with the main ant. The protagonist, holding the sword, Sakura, insisted that if they lost now, the ants would attack Toru and Artie and then Sistine and Hotaru. The main character held a sword out in front of him. He was serious about winning. Frey looked at him and called his name. The big light ant started making strange sounds with its mouth. Smaller dark ants lined up and were ready to attack the boys. The protagonist and Frey rushed forward, weapons in their hands. The protagonist shouted to Frey that she needed to run forward, and he, in turn, would go around the ants on the left. She replied that she understood him. Claws emerged from the protection on Frey's hands. She screamed and ran towards the smaller black ants. They rushed towards her, making sounds. Frey attacked one of the ants with a weapon that appeared from her handguard. She hit the ant in the face. Then, she turned around and swung her hand that held the weapon. She brought the hand down with the weapon and pierced the black ant's face. Frey freed the blade from the black ant's muzzle. She took a fighting stance, holding her arms out in front of her. The protagonist, seeing how Frey fought, thought that she fought like a swordsman, a gladiator. The main character rushed to attack and ran and pierced one of the black ants with his sword. The ant began to make sounds from the wound. Frey was fighting with the remaining ant. The second was wounded and crawling away. The third was lying on the floor without moving. The protagonist ran towards the main ant. The protagonist ran towards the main ant. The protagonist jumps and swings. He thinks that he has no time to play with insects. The main ant raises its claws up. The protagonist lands on the ground with his feet, then swings and strikes. He cuts off one of the main ant's legs, saying that this feint was successful. The ant raises his body and legs up in pain, making a loud noise. The protagonist, without wasting time, returns to the fight. The protagonist jumps and scolds the ant's head during the flight. The severed head of the ant flies to the side. The protagonist lands on his feet. The magic stone that was inside the ant falls out of him. The protagonist turns around and sees Frey fighting ants and calling for help. She was kicking one ant, trying to defeat another with a weapon, and another was behind her. The protagonist shouted that he was already coming to her aid. The boys defeated all the monsters. Magic stones fell out of each one in turn. They lay on the floor. The main character, having put away his weapon, collected stones from the floor. Frey leaned her hand on her legs and said that she managed to blush for a moment, that she came to their aid. The protagonist approached Frey and put the magical stones in her hand. He said that these 3 stones were meant for her. Frey was surprised by such an action. The protagonist. Frey blushed and said in surprise that why did the protagonist give her the magic stones because she ran away from the monsters only thanks to the protagonist. The protagonist walked away from Frey. He said that she came to help them. Frey pressed her hands to herself, in which were the magic stones. She became noticeably sad and thanked the protagonist. The protagonist squatted down and reached for the largest stone that had fallen from the main monster, the ant. Frey loomed over him from behind, holding a weapon in her hands, and she swung at the protagonist. The main character was lying on the ground unconscious, not moving. Against his background, the dark image of a girl with long hair emerged. The protagonist was able to move his hand and touch the place where his sword, Sakura, had previously hung. The protagonist tried to understand what he was feeling and what had happened after the fight with the ants. The protagonist realized that Frey had hit him on the head and that she had taken his weapon, Sakura. The protagonist became captive. He touched his head and thought that Sakura is a sword for him. As a member of his family, she was taken away from him. The protagonist looked ahead and thought that Frey's evil. She's around the corner. The protagonist opened his mouth and continued to think that he would definitely make up for lost time. Meanwhile, Frey was running as fast as she could. In her hand was Sakura, the sword. In the second hand was a bag of stones. The protagonist. She thought that the master, the owner, should help her. In the photo of the sharp sword, the main character, a girl, was hanging in the air. Her eyes were closed. She was hugging her legs with her hands. Her hair was flying to the sides. Frey ran as fast as she could, beads of sweat appearing on her face and body. Her eyes filled with tears. She ran and 3 words were spinning in her mind. That she had no choice. Frey remembered her brother, who was sick and in bed. He was coughing and said that he apologized to Frey for everything. She thought that she did this to the protagonist to save her brother and to end the hellish pain. Then she remembered how the man she was accompanying smiled evilly and said that Frey needed to obey him in everything. Otherwise, something irreparable could happen to her brother. Frey then thought of the protagonist as he extended his hand to her and protected her from the blows of the man she was accompanying. She thought that she had to betray the only person who offered her help. Frey ran as fast as she could, holding a bag of stones in one hand and his blade in the other. Frey thought she had to steal these things after all. Beads of sweat appeared on Frey's face. At some point, she felt something behind her. Frey didn't stop running, but decided to turn around. She saw the protagonist, who was running very fast, catching up with her with every second. Frey managed to see the approaching face of the protagonist. It terrified her. Her body began to tremble. The protagonist ran after her with a devastated look and muttered something unintelligible under his breath. Frey started running even faster, waving her arms back and forth. Tears appeared on her face. She thought that the protagonist would definitely deal with her. Frey was horrified and wondered how the protagonist could recover from the injuries he inflicted on her. She remembered the time spent with the protagonist and all the good words he had said to her. She thought that the protagonist had always been so kind and gentle with her. Frey remembered the moment when the protagonist squatted and said that he would definitely defeat the Ant-Man. At that time, she stood behind him and thought that he, at that moment, was full of discoveries and secrets. Frey continued to run. The protagonist was getting closer and closer to her with every step. She panicked, thinking that the protagonist would definitely deal with her, since she had betrayed him. But it was not her fault. He had let his guard down. She had no other choice. Frey ran, her face wet with tears. She screamed that the protagonist should not come near her. In her thoughts, a question arose. Why her life became like this? Frey recalled how she and her brother would sit on the floor, looking at and touching animal fur. At the time, they were still small and their parents were gone. Frey remembered the man with the animal fur on his cape. The man was smiling. It was Bart. He was a regular customer of her parents. He treated them well and even fed them several times. Brother Frey was lying in bed. He was sick. And at that moment, their life and Bart's attitude towards them changed. Bart smiled cheerfully and told Frey that if she wanted his brother to be treated by good doctors, she should listen to him and come to his room tonight. Under the pretext of personal protection, he lured Frey to his room. Frey lay naked in bed. She was all cowered with fear and disgust. She was crying. Bart ordered her to do whatever he wanted and began to do with her whatever he wanted. He embarrassed her and hurt her. Frey lay face down on the bed, her eyes closed, her body shaking with fear, Bart's hands reaching out to her. She thought she was following all these vile orders just for the sake of her little brother's recovery. Frey ran, tears streaming down her tear-stained face. She thought that all her suffering would be useless just because of such a trifle. The protagonist shouted after Frey that she didn't need to run in that direction. Frey slowed down a bit as she could no longer hear the protagonist's footsteps. She stopped and looked at her hands, which held a blade and a pouch of stones. She said that she had no choice. She had to deliver these things to cure her brother. Frey stands and lifts her head up, still holding the blade and the bag of stones in her hands, and notices a large, dark-colored scale in front of her. Frey falls back. She starts screaming loudly, as a huge black dragon appeared in front of her, who noticed her. At that moment, she hears the voice of the protagonist. that he thought she was just a thief, but it turns out she did it to save her brother. Frey was horrified. Tears continued to flow down her face. She sees the protagonist jumping and attacking the monster. He stands in front of her armed with a sword and says that he will listen to her apology later. She needs to give Sakura and the magic stones and leave. The protagonist turns around and asks if Frey has come to her senses, and if so, she needs to run. She stands up and runs away in a hurry. The protagonist stood in front of the monster, holding a sword. At the main character's feet was a bag of magic stones and a sword. Sakura, the main character, smiling broadly, took Sakura and put it to his face. He said that he finally got his sword back. Sakura, the monster opened its mouth and began to roar loudly. The protagonist, armed with two swords, looked at the monster and said that it was obviously the boss of the floor. He would have to find a way out of this floor before Hotaru and Sistina returned. Some time ago, it was night, in one of the houses of the city. Sistina plaintively asked if the main character was really going to punish her. Sistina was lying on her stomach on the bed in front of the protagonist. Hotaru was sitting on the bed next to her, looking at Sistina. The protagonist was sitting behind Sistina. He raised his hand up and said that Sistina needed to lift her hips up a little. Sistina was on all fours and turned back. She started to lift her dress up with one hand. The inside of one leg was exposed. She asked the protagonist if she did everything right. The protagonist raised his hand to swing. Then he said that Sistine would be punished today and would get a spanking on her soft spot because she elevated her self-sacrifice to an absolute. The protagonist hit Sistina with all his might on her exposed soft spot, saying that this is her punishment. From the unexpected blow, Sistina jerked. Her face turned red, and she made a barely audible sound. The protagonist continued to hit Sistina's soft spot, saying that she would get more and more. She continued to make sounds. Then the protagonist leaned against Sistina's soft spot and continued to hit her. Hotaru watched as the protagonist leaned against Sistina's soft spot, and Sistina turned her head and said that she had never felt so embarrassed in her life. Hotaru thought that Sistina was very pleased. The protagonist raised his head. He was trying to catch his breath. The protagonist asked Hotaru that maybe she should also try what he was doing. Hotaru looked at him in surprise. She did not expect such a proposal from the protagonist. Sistina remained on all fours, her underwear slipping down her leg. Hotaru touched Sistina and grabbed her dress. Hotaru said that Sistina should try to relax. Hotaru was going to work with her hand. Hotaru puts a few fingers in her mouth and then lowers her hand. Her hand leans against Sistina's body. Sistina's face is all red from embarrassment, and she lets out a scream from the unexpected touch. The protagonist watches what is happening carefully. Sistina pressed herself into the bed, but continued to stand on all fours. Hotaru raised her hand and said that Sistina really liked this feeling, since she intended to continue this way. Sistina sheepishly replied that Hotaru's words were not true. Hotaru and the protagonist kissed each other and touched Sistina. Sistina was lying on the bed and turning her head towards the guys, said that they were not being fair, since she also wanted to kiss. Hotaru told her that what was happening now could not be called a punishment. The protagonist stood in front of Hotaru. He started touching his pants and said that he was completely ready. Hotaru looked at the protagonist and smiled. Sistina was on all fours, her head leaning on the bed. She looked at the boys and said that the main character should continue to punish her. One of her hands was on her hips. The main character, hugging Hotaru by an interesting part of the body, looked at Sistina. The protagonist grabbed Sistina by the hips and moved closer to her. Then he pressed himself against her hips with all his might. Sistina screamed and arched in surprise. The protagonist continued his action. Hotaru began to lick Sistina's leg and said that the guys should not forget about her. Sistina continued to scream. Hotaru put her hand on Sistina's soft spot. Sistina then found herself lying on her back on the bed. She had her hands over her face and her legs were spread apart. Hotaru lay on one of Sistina's legs and continued to force herself on her. Sistina was all red with embarrassment. She held her hands on her chest and shouted that she was going to go crazy. Sistina was lying on the bed, trying to catch her breath. Her hand was next to her head. The protagonist asked her if she would now moderate her ardor with her self-sacrifice. Sistina was lying and agreeing with the words of the protagonist. The main character held a sword in front of him. Beads of sweat were running down his face. He remembered and thought why he got involved with Frey and ran after her. The dragon monster growled and waved its tail. The protagonist exclaimed that he needed to get out of here as soon as possible. The protagonist's face was dripping with sweat from fear. He was already prepared for death. In an instant, he heard from Sakura that he needed to go down immediately. The protagonist obeys Sakura's words in horror and falls to the ground screaming. Both weapons are still in the protagonist's hands. The dragon monster stands still, and the protagonist flies off to the side head first. The entire room is covered in dust from the battle. The protagonist tried to catch his breath and said that he was very lucky that he managed to dodge the monster's blow. At that very moment, the protagonist hears from Sakura that he needs to jump away. The protagonist looks up and sees the monster's huge clawed paw hanging over him. The protagonist sweats and says that the monster shouldn't expect the protagonist to give up so easily. The monster's clawed paw lands on the ground where the protagonist was standing. But it doesn't reach him, as the protagonist manages to jump away in time. The impact of the paw on the floor sends floor fragments and stones flying to the sides. The protagonist, having gained strength, raises his hands in flight and swings. He threatens the monster. The protagonist thought that he would use the shockwave to create momentum. The protagonist thrusts his sword into the monster's paw and hangs in the air with his legs spread out in different directions. The protagonist pulls his sword out of the monster. Several pieces fly off, but he remains unharmed. The protagonist lands on the ground and makes a few jumps back. He notices that the monster is quite slow. Having noticeably lost his strength, the protagonist decides to strike the monster again. The protagonist hits the monster in the paw not with a sword, but with a katana. Katana. Strike. The protagonist deals damage to the monster's paw, and blood starts flowing from the wound. The monster starts to roar loudly in pain. The protagonist looks at the monster and says enthusiastically that this is what a Japanese sword means. Beads of sweat run down the protagonist's face. He is alarmed to realize that, however, the distance to Sakura is not decreasing much, so it is too early to rejoice in success. The next moment, the monster strikes, but the protagonist manages to dodge it. The protagonist skillfully rolls, leans on the ground with one hand, and finally lands on both feet. Holding Sakura in his hand, the protagonist wipes the sweat from his face. He thinks out loud that this is distracting him so much that he can't think of anything. Looking ahead, the protagonist notices something. A crack with a ladder opened up in front of him. He thinks out loud that with his help, he will still be able to do it. The distance to the stairs was large, but he thought that he was still close to the stairs on this floor. The main character looks ahead. He is focused and thinks that if he manages to run to the stairs and get to the second floor, his health will instantly be restored. Behind the protagonist stood a monster with its back to him, only its muzzle was turned to the side. The protagonist thought that fortunately this monster was slow. He needed to turn around to attack it. The main character rushed towards the stairs with a scream. The main character was all covered in sweat. He ran and thought that the stairs were 10 meters away, and there were no signs of the dragon moving. Already 7, 6, 5 meters. Hotaru and Sistina naked on the stairs and thinks that today was too hard for him. He needs to quickly return home with the girls and drown in their arms. The next moment, when the protagonist was a few meters away from the entrance to the stairs, a dragon appears in front of him and pierces his stomach with one of the spikes located on his tail. The protagonist does not understand what just happened. The dragon pulls the spikes out of the protagonist. He falls to the ground, drops his katana, and grabs his bleeding stomach in horror. The main character is on all fours, leaning on the floor with one hand and trying to stop the bleeding from his stomach with the other. The protagonist was lying motionless on the floor. There was blood around him. His 2 swords were lying nearby. The dragon was standing by the stairs and looking at the protagonist. The protagonist thought that he had read a lot of short stories before, and they often described such situations. The main character was lying on the ground. He was gritting his teeth in pain and thought that he was too careless and that's why he lost. It seemed to him that Sakura's voice was calling him. He asked her for forgiveness for this situation. Lying on the floor, the protagonist felt the translucent body of Sakura hug him. She cried and begged the protagonist not to give up under any circumstances and to be until the end. The protagonist's eyes filled with tears. He realized that he was not imagining things. It was really Sakura talking to him. Sakura, closing her eyes and clenching her fists, screamed that the main character must not die under any circumstances. The main character, standing up, took the sword. Sakura, in his hands and asked her what would happen to her next, since she took his blood and raised her rank. The protagonist sat down, leaning his back against the wall. Blood was oozing from his stomach wound. He held Sakura in his arms and said that this is what tension is. It seems like he has already died, but it is not so, since he can talk to Sakura. The protagonist, barely opening his eyes, looked at the dragon and asked what the next attack would be. The dragon turned its face to the side. The protagonist, having gathered his last strength, stood on all fours. In front of him was a dragon. Sakura told the protagonist that it seemed that her power could mislead the enemy. The dragon stood with his back to the protagonist and his front to the ladder in the wall. The pouch on the protagonist's belt hung there too. The protagonist said that he needed to take his medicine as soon as possible. He took out something round and small and began to eat quickly. The main character was covered in bruises. He held his hand on his stomach and said that the bleeding had stopped. He should not catch it again. The protagonist took Sakura in his hands and decided to activate his ability and see the status of his sword. Sakura was with rank. The skill value reached 50. The protagonist looked forward and was surprised by the updated characteristics of the sword. Then he said that the sign and the hidden form, that's what it all meant. The protagonist leaned over, holding Sakura in his arms and imagining the bear he had drawn. He then laughed and said that he was sure he had the same tension when he fought the bear hide. The protagonist stood up, armed with swords. He stood behind the dragon and thought, what does it mean that the dragon can't see him completely? What if he tries to retreat? Sakura warned the protagonist about the danger that awaits him if the dragon notices him. The protagonist squatted down and touched an object that broke the silence. The dragon heard the noise and looked towards where the protagonist was standing. Beads of sweat were running down the protagonist's face, and he realized in a panic that as soon as Sakura had approached the dragon, he had immediately noticed the protagonist. The dragon turned to the protagonist. He held his sword in front of him and stood in a fighting stance. The dragon began to strike, and the protagonist only had time to heal himself, jumping from one place to another. Words popped into his head that he needed to crouch, then dodge, then jump to the left. He needed to get into the dragon's blind spot. The protagonist touches one of the dragon's spikes. He lets out a sickening cry of pain. Sakura asked the protagonist to stay as far away from the dragon as possible. The protagonist was wounded in the dog. Beads of sweat appeared on his body. He realized that for now, that he was still conscious. Sakura called the protagonist by name. Another attack was repelled by the protagonist with a sword. The blow that hit the protagonist's sword froze him aside. The protagonist held his side wound. He thought it would be better if he had a big sword. The protagonist gathered his strength and through the pain stood up on his feet. He found himself behind the dragon. The protagonist notices that a piece of his sword is lying on the ground. He moves his gaze to the sword that is in his hand. The protagonist sees that the sword is broken in half. The protagonist sweats in fear. His body starts shaking. He screams that this terrible sword has broken. Sakura warns the protagonist about the dragon's attack. The protagonist stands and watches as a dragon's tail with many spikes rushes towards him. The protagonist realizes and says that this time he really screwed up. At the last second, someone's hair flashed in front of him. The protagonist, opening his eyes, thinks that he is not in so much pain now. Hotaru appears in front of him. Her interesting body part is right on the protagonist's face. The protagonist looks at Hotaru. He smiles and says that she appeared at the right time. Hotaru, hearing the words of the protagonist, looked at him and smiled. Hotaru stood up and shouted that Sistina needed to change. Sistina, armed with her axe, distracted the dragon. The protagonist was lying on the ground. Hotaru said that Sistina needed to heal the protagonist, and she would take care of the dragon. The main character, Sojiro, told his friend Hotaru that the cruel and terrible dragon might attack again. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, smirked and said that she was strong and the only one who could repel it. She turned away and told the young man to listen to Sixtinus and that he needed to be cured. The protagonist, Sojiro, groaned and said that he understood her, after which he walked away, and the protagonist's girlfriend, named Hotaru, prepared to fight. The protagonist's girlfriend, Hotaru, is as strong as the sword whose characteristics she inherits, despite being personified. This is what happens when he gets close to people. Only blood and pain. The protagonist, Sojiro, frowned and thought that he had this wound because of his weakness. The girl named Sakura looked at him with pity and thought about what she could do if she were anthropomorphic. A girl named Sistine rushed at the protagonist Sojiro and said in fear that she thought he would really end his life. The protagonist Sojiro did not expect Sistine to approach so abruptly. A girl named Sistine began examining the protagonist Sojiro and told him to show her the wound and she would heal him. The protagonist Sojiro thought that he was not the type of person where defeat brought negative emotions. While a girl named Sistine was examining his wound, he asked how she got there so quickly. The girl named Sistine said that they met a party of high-level adventurers on their way home. Then they asked Toru-san about it, and Hotaru used sign about it. And Hotaru used sign detection. She showed the ring on her wrist and said that thanks to the group's ring, they found him. The protagonist Sojiro smiled, realizing how they did it. While the girl named Sistine was treating his wound, he thought he should thank her. The high-level rings of the group are sold by the merchant Will, the girl named Sakura-chan, Sistine, and of course Hotaru-san are now his life. And no matter what he was missing, the protagonist's friend named Hotaru looked at them and thought that she had started to treat the protagonist Sojiro, and that was great. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, was retreating from the attacks of a cruel and terrible dragon. She stood in front of the dragon, thinking that he would finally come. The cruel and terrible dragon attacked her and she bared her teeth, thinking that he was using the wind as a blade. She looked at the cruel and terrible dragon with anger, thinking that all his movements turned into a blow. The cruel and terrible dragon continued to attack the friend named Hotaru. She thought that she needed to not lose her clothes at the last moment. She looked at the cruel and terrible dragon and thought that this monster had a weakly protected head. After that, she jumped up and swung her sword, striking the dragon's head with a cruel and terrible blow. The protagonist Sojiro thought that she was really strong, but she didn't have the usual sharpness. He looked at Sistine again and thought that his treatment was taking too long. He asked her how it was to fight the floor boss while she was carefully treating him. She said that it was hard. A girl named Sistine recalled her battle and said that she could protect herself a little with the art of self-defense, although she didn't know if she could withstand an attack from here. The protagonist Sojiro thought, putting his finger to his lips. He said that the weapon's rank was no different from his great sword, and the attack would only work if it struck Sakura's sword. The protagonist's friend Hotaru was dodging the attacks of a cruel and terrible dragon. Sojiro asked if the protagonist's friend Hotaru had any white magic that would be suitable for the attack. Sistine said that light magic was too rare and she had no information. The main character Sojiro showed the stone and said that he was training Sakura with this firestone, but there was no particular success. A girl named Sistine said that if he failed, he would most likely end his life. The protagonist Sojiro agreed with this a little sadly. He just wanted to say that she could always run away, but the girl named Sistine interrupted him and hugged him. She said that this time she would give him back everything he had done for her. He looked at her thinking that he wanted to defeat the floor boss, but he was trying to run away to save Sistine and everyone else. She pulled away and said that he should be able to move now, and she thought about their prospects. The main character, Sojiro, smiled and stood up, thinking that she was protecting his back. He said that, although he was shy, he was very happy. The girl named Sistine smiled and agreed. The protagonist, Sojiro, turned around with a smile and said that they would do it, and confidently asked how he could live in this world if he couldn't defeat him. The girl named Sistine took her weapon, confidently ready to continue the fight. Meanwhile, the protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru continued to fight. The protagonist Sojiro said that the cruel and terrible dragon's blows were too strong and needed to be weakened, then ordered the girl named Sistine to attack from the left while he and Sakura went for his forehead. The protagonist, Sojiro, ran forward, telling them not to overdo it, then thought that it should work. He grabbed his sword and ran around the cruel and terrible dragon, thinking about the girl named Sakura to start. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, asked him with a smile if he had finished. The protagonist, Sojiro, did not answer. The protagonist, Sojiro, thought that the cruel and terrible dragon was serious, but he had to defeat it. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, looked at the protagonist, Sojiro, and with the same smile, said that he was full of determination. The protagonist, Sojiro, stood next to her, looking at the cruel and terrible dragon. He told her not to screw up, and that the cruel and terrible dragon needed to be lured to them. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, told him to leave it to her. A cruel and terrible dragon attacked Sistine. The protagonist Sojiro frowned, thinking that the girl named Sistine was successfully coping with her task, but the cruel and terrible dragon did not notice him with the girl named Hotaru. Hotaru and Sojiro stood behind the cruel and terrible dragon, while Sistine fought off the cruel and terrible dragon's attacks. Sojiro thought that the dragon would soon tire. Then he would attack him from a blind spot, but he couldn't cut too deep, and he would have to aim at the same place. After some time, the protagonist Sojiro thought that his target would be the leg of the cruel and terrible dragon, and then he thrust his sword into its leg. The cruel and terrible dragon roared loudly and turned towards the protagonist Sojiro. The protagonist Sojiro jumped back and thought that he had succeeded. He ran up to the cruel and terrible dragon again and continued to strike, thinking that he couldn't stop and needed to move his hands. The girl named Sistine also continued to attack him, and the protagonist's friend named Hotaru looked at them, waiting for the right moment. The cruel and terrible dragon already had his entire leg wounded. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru jumped up, preparing to strike the cruel and terrible dragon. Just as the protagonist Sojiro wanted to say that the cruel and terrible dragon would end, the cruel and terrible dragon noticed the protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru and opened her mouth. The protagonist Sojiro and the girl named Sistine were very scared for her, and the protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru bared her teeth. The cruel and terrible dragon grabbed Hotaru's leg. Sojiro wondered if they had succeeded, but when he raised his head and looked at Hotaru, he saw that his leg had flown off. The cruel and terrible dragon had bitten it off. The protagonist Sojiro was shocked. He remembered how the protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru had smiled before and couldn't believe what was happening. Someone shouted and asked what was going on. The protagonist Sojiro was shocked and didn't know what to do. Someone kept shouting at them to help Sakura and stop watching and do something. The protagonist Sojiro thought that there was no guarantee that they could defeat him, but something had to be done. It's time to act. The main character Sojiro put the firestone to the sword and said the command, "Magic stone, come to me." The girl named Sakura became a little excited and pressed her hands to her chest. Afterwards, a girl named Sakura appeared near the protagonist, Sojiro, without clothes. She put her arms around his neck and called him brother, saying that they had finally met. After some time, a girl named Sakura joined the fight. The cruel and terrible dragon turned away from the attacks. The girl named Sakura jumped into the air non-stop, delivering more attacks. She shouted that she could not catch him. The main character Sojiro shouted the command, "Hidden illusion," to her. He told her to avoid close combat while she was in the zone, while the girl named Sakura was right above the cruel and terrible dragon. She confidently said that she would try to defeat him with magic. The goal is to destroy the monster. The girl named Sakura continued to fight confidently. The protagonist Sojiro thought that the cruel and terrible dragon did not notice Sakura, which means that the stealth spell works. The girl named Sakura frowned and put her fingers in the right position, saying that they continue. A lot of blows flew at the cruel and terrible dragon from above. A shower of fiery arrows. The girl named Sistine jumped back. A girl named Sakura called out to the protagonist Sojiro, and a girl named Sistine said that now was the moment. The protagonist Sojiro ran to the girlfriend named Hotaru. While the girl named Sakura and the girl named Sistine continued to fight, the protagonist Sojiro ran towards the girl named Hotaru, who was sadly sitting near the wall. He thought that the protagonist's girl named Hotaru had protected him by receiving a deep wound. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, ran her hand over her cheek. The protagonist, Sojiro, wondered why she was in such a hurry because in the end, it was just a feint. He thought it was because he was weak. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, looked at the protagonist Sojiro and asked him what was wrong with his face. The protagonist Sojiro frowned as he looked at her. She said that he was strong and that she knew that he hadn't trained much, but it had already been a week since she came to this world. She smiled and reached out to him, saying that he had made good progress and that she was sure he had talent. The protagonist, Sojiro, pursed his lips, not answering her. The girl named Sakura waved her hand, calling the command Fire Arrow, which immediately pierced the cruel and terrible dragon through. The protagonist Sojiro turned around, looking in their direction. The cruel and terrifying dragon opened its mouth wide in pain while it was smoking. The protagonist Sojiro looked at Sakura, thinking that she and a protagonist friend named Hotaru were similar in some way because they both used different tricks. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru thought that things were bad and that the protagonist Sojiro should move away because the monster was up to something. Meanwhile, the protagonist Sojiro continued to watch the cruel and terrible dragon. The cruel and terrible dragon curled up as attacks continued to hit it. The cruel and terrible dragon looked at the floor. The protagonist Sojiro assumed that it was just a defensive stance. The girl stopped for a moment, and the protagonist Sojiro said that the girl named Sakura had hit him in the neck with magic, but he froze. Everyone became wary. The girl named Sakura and the girl named Sistine began to attack the cruel and terrible dragon on the back again. The main character Sojiro smiled slightly and said that with such an axe they would defeat him, and the girls continued to beat the cruel and terrible dragon. Suddenly, he noticed something. The cruel and terrible dragon swelled up. The main character Sojiro shouted at the girls to get away from him. The cruel and terrible dragon straightened up abruptly and spread its wings, roaring very loudly. The cruel and terrible dragon let out a loud roar. Everyone covered their faces with their hands, and the girls screamed, not understanding what was happening. The girls called out to each other. They were completely wounded, and the girl named Sakura fell to the ground, not understanding what had just happened. The protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru and the protagonist Sojiro were also injured. The protagonist Sojiro bared his teeth and his body trembled. The cruel and terrible dragon turned towards the protagonist Sojiro with an evil look. The main character Sojiro was angry at this terrible monster, and anger was visible in his eyes. He spread his arms out to the side and ordered the protagonist's friend named Hotaru to appear. He stood right in front of a cruel and terrible dragon. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru smiled and said confidently that she was listening to him. A katana appeared in the protagonist Sojiro's hand, and he grabbed it tightly with both hands. The bag and sword fell to the ground. The main character Sojiro was ready to fight, looking angrily at the cruel and terrible dragon. The cruel and terrible dragon was also ready to attack, and opened its mouth wide. The protagonist Sojiro thought that Hotarumaru was badly damaged, and now her limit is one hit. He was sure that he would finish off the cruel and terrible dragon with one hit. The protagonist Sojiro began to move forward. A girl named Sistine begged him while blood was running down her face. Sakura apologized for not being able to defeat the cruel and terrible dragon. The main character Sojiro ran towards the cruel and terrible dragon. He thought about how they shouldn't worry about him. He confidently approached the cruel and terrible dragon, his mouth open. He thought that he would kill the cruel and terrible dragon and, jumping up, stuck the katana into its eye. The attacks of the cruel and terrible dragon are becoming more and more violent. The protagonist, Sojiro, thought that his left arm was all sore and he was bleeding heavily. The protagonist, Sojiro, was about to lose consciousness. He thought that he couldn't pass out now. The cruel and terrible dragon swung and attacked again. The protagonist, Sojiro, jumped back, thinking that he needed to gain speed, but even so he could lose. But the protagonist, Sojiro, decides to attack the cruel and terrible dragon and runs forward with his mouth open, thinking that the enemy will not wait for him, and then he will put all his strength into the next blow. The cruel and terrible dragon opened his mouth. All the girls were worried about the main character Sojiro as he jumped on the cruel and terrible dragon and stuck his katana into its eye, after which everything went black before my eyes. After some time, the protagonist Sojiro saw a wooden ceiling in front of his eyes. The protagonist Sojiro mumbled and asked where he was. A girl named Sistine came up to him. He was lying in bed. The main character Sojiro smiled and wished her good morning. The girl named Sistine smiled at first and was about to wish him the same, when suddenly, with tears in her eyes, she cried out that it was not so. The protagonist Sojiro thought about how quickly her mood changed. She worriedly said that he had been unconscious for 2 whole days and that she was very worried. She could hardly hold back her tears. The protagonist Sojiro thought that she had been taking care of him all this time. The protagonist, Sojiro, hugged Sistine and thanked her, saying that he was glad she was safe. A girl named Sistine began to cry, saying that she too was glad that he was safe. The protagonist, Sojiro, looked around and asked where the girl named Sakura and the friend named Hotaru were. The girl named Sistine looked at the 2 katanas on the nightstand and said that they were both seriously injured, and the protagonist's friend named Hotaru was restoring her armor and decided to get some sleep. The main character Sojiro said that he understood everything, but he himself thought that it was a tough fight, but they still survived and did not have to sacrifice anyone. The main character Sojiro said that the girl named Sistine had slept, but she refused, sternly saying that he also needed to rest. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled and thought that she was stubborn. He lifted the blanket and said that they would sleep together then, and then she would tell him what happened after he passed out. The girl named Sistine agreed and climbed onto the bed, her cheeks slightly flushed. As soon as she touched the pillow, she fell asleep. He ran his finger along her cheek and mentally apologized for making her worry. He turned his head and looked at the katana, wondering if the friend named Hotaru was sleeping. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru smiled and asked if the protagonist Sojiro was awake and how his body was. She then told him not to worry and that she and Sakura were fine. She recalled how the girl named Sistine yelled at them, telling them to take care of themselves and their bodies, and said that she'd convinced them to rest. That was her style. The protagonist Sojiro laughed and said that it was probably true. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, put her hands under her head and asked him if she wanted to tell him what happened, then told him not to worry so much. She remembered what happened after he lost consciousness. The protagonist's friend, named Hotaru, said that he managed to defeat the monster, but he lost consciousness, and the girl named Sistine, barely moving, dragged him on her back and carried them in the form of swords in her hands, trying to rise higher. She remembered what happened then. A girl named Sistine thought that the stairs were far away, when suddenly a girl came up to her. She took the protagonist Sojiro by the arm and said that she would help her. The girl said with tears in her eyes that she knew that she was bad for the girl named Sistine, and she did not trust her. But the girl named Sistine interrupted her and accepted the offer of help. The girl named Sistine smiled and said that she saw the girl watching the battle. After the girl named Sistine asked her to help them, they were dragging the main character Sojiro together, and a girl named Sistine told her not to tell the secret of the main character's friend named Hotaru and Sakura. The girl said that she wouldn't tell anyone and would apologize again later. The protagonist's friend Hotaru continued that the leader of Laytok then promised them a reward, so they came to him to tell him of their victory. She said that Will was especially impressed and sent them to the inn. After the girl named Sistine used recovery magic until she got tired. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru said that the girl named Sistine had been healing him all this time. The protagonist Sojiro looked at Sistine with pity and thought that she was silly. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru frowned and called out to the protagonist Sojiro. Hotaru wanted to say something about Frey, and Sojiro immediately became wary. After some time, Sojiro was sitting on the bed when suddenly Sakura appeared in front of him, hugging him. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that she was already moving calmly, and the girl named Sakura agreed with this. The main character, Sojiro, asked her if she understood what she wanted to do. The girl named Sakura said with a smile that she understood, but here's why. No. The protagonist, Sojiro, sadly said that even though she had recovered, he then told her to be careful. The girl named Sakura turned around and said that she understood him and that she always listens to his requests. The main character, Sojiro, noted with a smile that the girl named Sakura is very fast. The protagonist's friend Hotaru appeared near the protagonist, Sojiro, and turned to him and began to talk about her report of what happened. She said that what Frey did was not out of a sense of duty. The protagonist, Sojiro, laughed and asked her if she had any suggestions. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru said that the girl named Sakura went to find out why Frey did this to her real master. A girl named Sakura saw Lord Frey screaming that she had failed. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, said that if he did something unforgivable, she wouldn't mind getting rid of him. Mr. Frey told her to ask for forgiveness, after which he lashed her with a whip, while Frey said that she just needed medicine for her brother. The protagonist, Sojiro, sat on the edge of the bed, asking why she thought of him that way. The protagonist's girlfriend, Hotaru, chuckled and kissed him, saying that Sakura would be back soon and they would do their best. The protagonist, Sojiro, blushed slightly and smiled, agreeing. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, smiled and said that she had a proposal. After some time, the girl named Sakura came back. She climbed through the window and said that he really was a shady guy. When she climbed through the window, she was surprised. She looked around and asked where everyone was. The protagonist, Sojiro, sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru said that the girl named Sakura had also transformed, just a cutie, and the girl named Sistine said with a smile that they were all girls. The girl named Sakura said their names with a smile and placed her palms on her cheeks. She threw herself into the arms of the protagonist, Sojiro, and said that at first she thought he just wanted to be alone together. She hugged the protagonist Sojiro around the neck and kissed him on the lips. The girl named Sakura sat on his lap and he grabbed her by the hips. The girl named Sakura said that she wanted him to call on her more often during battles. The main character Sojiro put her on the bed and hovered over her, agreeing to her request. He put his hand on her cheek and kissed her lips, and after a while he pulled away a little, and saliva stretched between their lips. Sakura had tears in her eyes and apologized to protagonist Sojiro for hurting him that time. Protagonist Sojiro looked at her, remembering what happened. He thought that it was still hard for her to remember this. The main character Sojiro told her with a smile that she was not bad at all because he was here with her and he was glad that they met. He put his hand on her cheek and said that he loved her. The girl named Sakura opened her mouth in a little surprise. The main character Sojiro said that he had slept for several days and had a lot of things to think about, then apologized for not being very gentle. A girl named Sakura laughed and said that he had very dirty thoughts. The girl named Sakura hugged him around the neck and blushed, saying that she would be as good as the friend named Hotaru. The girl named Sakura asked if she was cute. Then she smiled widely. After some time, they were lying in an embrace under the blanket. The girl named Sakura asked if he liked it. The main character Sojiro asked if she wanted to know, then said that she was like a beast if she knew what he meant. The girl named Sakura said a little pitifully that Frey said that her brother needed medicine and that he was poisoned. The main character Sojiro covered himself with a blanket and said that it was enough to talk about it. The girl named Sakura agreed. After a while, Frey looked at someone with a little surprise. Afterwards, she put her hand on her chest and asked if Mr. Bard had finished his life. She didn't know what to do. Afterwards, she said that she was now free. After some time, she was walking down a dark street and thinking about how his life was ended by a sword, and apparently it was a very expensive sword. She thought, how could such a cautious man's life be ended? She turned around and thought that only he could do something like that. She thought of Sakura and the girlfriend named Hotaru, thinking about them turning into katanas and their mysterious ability. After some time, a new sword appeared in front of Sakura and the protagonist Sojiro, and the protagonist Sojiro did not understand how it happened. But after, he said with a smile that it seemed like a new companion was waiting for them. He was able to summon a new sword. The brilliance of this sword is worthy of a ruler. Some time ago, a girl named Sakura and the protagonist Sojiro were lying together on a bed. The girl named Sakura asked the protagonist Sojiro what happened. The protagonist Sojiro was reading something on the magic panel in front of him and said that he was looking at the status panel. And she has magic sword summoning. The panel listed karma, age, specialty, skills, and special skills. A girl named Sakura asked in surprise if this meant that their family was growing. The main character Sojiro looked at her and said that it was because there were many swords in the storage room. He looked ahead and offered her a look. He put out his hands and summoned a magic sword that appeared in front of them. After some time, the protagonist Sojiro showed this sword to the other girls. The protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru said disinterestedly that he summoned the sword. She said it was another adult woman. The protagonist Sojiro asked if she was familiar with the sword. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, said seriously that everyone in the vault knew each other. The protagonist, Sojiro, sat on the bed and said that this was the sword that stood next to her. The main character Sojiro recalled his childhood and said that when his grandfather gave him one of his swords to choose from, he could not decide between them. He was surprised at how long the swords were. The protagonist Sojiro pulled out his sword and assessed the equipment. Girl Skezine, rank C+, forging cost 21, absorption 0, skills, empathy, communication, intimidation, coercion, magical manipulation, ability, darkness, special skills, arrogance. The protagonist Sojiro asked in shock if this sword was a national treasure belonging to the Tashogu girl. The protagonist Sojiro trembled, saying that this was a famous sword made in the Kamakura period. The sword that belonged to Ieyasu Tokugawa was now in his storage. A girl named Sistine asked if this was bad. The main character, Sojiro, jumped up from his seat, shouting that he was going to his grandfather and give him a massage. A girl named Sistine asked him why he was so excited. A girl named Sakura smiled and said that he was just very happy. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru called out to him, and he stopped, asking what she wanted. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru offered him to return this old sword. The protagonist Sojiro was surprised. The protagonist Sojiro asked what she was talking about when she called the sword old. The protagonist's friend Hotaru approached him and said that she was talking about both the girl and the sword, and that she didn't like it somehow. The protagonist's girlfriend, Hotaru, hugged him to her chest, causing the protagonist, Sojiro, to blush. Hotaru said that she had been in many battles and lacked combat experience, since all she had done was sit in the arms of the strong. The protagonist, Sojiro, wondered if something had happened while they were standing next to each other. He said that she was acting like she was in charge here. The protagonist's friend, named Hotaru, said that he chose her, and also that they have a huge difference in rank. Hotaru is ranked SE, and the new sword is ranked C+. Hotaru was not let go by the protagonist Sojiro, and he wondered what she was doing. The girl said that although the protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru is younger, she also has the right to vote, and the sword does not age if it is properly cared for. The protagonist Sojiro thought about what she is like. The girl said that the main character's friend named Hotaru is an impudent barbarian. The main character Sojiro looked at the smiling friend named Hotaru and thought that she was laughing. When Hotaru and this girl were standing next to each other, they constantly called each other names. The main character Sojiro thought that they always behaved like this. The girl said that she also has dignity, because she is a lady, and as a girl she is certainly a winner. The main character Sojiro thinks about her being a skashin, and he doesn't like it. The protagonist Sojiro sat on the bed and asked with a smile if it was a skishin. The girl said that she was sorry that she did not greet the Lord. The protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru laughed, and the protagonist, Sojiro, said that it was no big deal, then offered to give her a name, and the girl said that it would be nice of him. The protagonist Sojiro thought about it. He thought about naming her Hikari or Cho, but decided that none of that was appropriate, and thought about what to call Ieyasu Tokugawa's sword. He raised his sword up and said that now her name would be Aioi. Ai said it was a wonderful name, and then thanked him. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru hugged the protagonist Sojiro from behind. The girl named Sistine and the girl named Sakura smiled sweetly, and the protagonist Sojiro said that he was glad to meet them, and just recently, when he got into trouble, he ran out of swords. Afterwards, he continued with a smile that he was glad that he had her. Aoi said that he could rely on her, and she would prove that she was more useful than that monkey. The protagonist Sojiro raised his finger and was about to ask if she knew something, but she interrupted him and said she didn't know. The protagonist's friend Hotaru asked if he wanted to make fun of her. The protagonist Sojiro lowered his head and said seriously that he would tell everything later, and there was something more important. He recalled the battle with the cruel and terrible dragon, and said that not long ago, they all almost ended their lives. Aoi thought about it, and asked if the protagonist's friend named Hotaru could have lost her life. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that both the protagonist's friend named Hotaru and the girl named Sakura could have lost their life. Aoi asked if that meant they would have to fight a lot in this world. The protagonist, Sojiro, said yes. The protagonist, Sojiro, seriously said that it would be wrong to force her to fight, but he wants her to be on his side. Aoi was a little surprised. The protagonist, Sojiro, stood up, leaving his sword on the bed, and said that they had been chatting for too long and suggested going to the mansion. He approached Sistine and, placing his hand on his shoulder, said that he wanted to talk to her too. Aoi was called out by a friend named Hotaru. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru sat on the bed and asked her what she wanted. Aoi said that the protagonist Sojiro really liked swords before, then asked what she wanted now. The protagonist's friend Hotaru said that he had really grown up to be cute while the protagonist Sojiro was putting on his jacket. Aoi put her hands on his chest and said that he seemed to have become a beautiful person, and that made her happy. The protagonist's friend Hotaru smirked and said that Aoi was upset that she hadn't seen him grow up. Aoi indignantly said that this was not true at all. Aoi said that she just thinks that any other sword could have been in her place, and that's why she's happy to be here. When the protagonist Sojiro took the sword, Aoi addressed him as a master and said that she leaves everything to him, and he can fight her as much as he wants. The protagonist Sojiro smiled widely and thanked her. The protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru said with a smirk that Aoi seemed to have a bad judgment about men. The protagonist Sojiro looked at the protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru and told her that it was time to stop making fun of Aoi. It was time for them to go to the master's mansion. Arriving there, They were surprised by its size. When they went inside, they noticed that there were a lot of people there. One of the maids looked at them and said that they would have to wait a little while. The protagonist Sojiro and everyone else followed her, asking if anything was wrong. The maid thought for a moment and said that in the end they would have found out everything anyway. Then she said that the son of the Becker family had taken his life and that it was supposedly an accident. They were a little tense, but not exactly upset. The protagonist Sojiro apologized for asking. The maid said that he was the kind of person that would not be missed. The protagonist Sojiro thought about how she said allegedly and that she was quite harsh. He wondered why. The protagonist Sojiro looked away and thought that he felt Sistine watching him and she was going to make a hole in the back of his head. Sistine followed him. After a while, the maid told him to wait in this place. They were sitting at the table. A girl named Sistine turned to Sakura. She asked if the maid was talking about that Bart Becker. The protagonist Sojiro asked what she was talking about. The protagonist Sojiro and Sakura devoured the food on the table, saying that it was delicious and that they would always eat it. A girl named Sistine said that she and Frey talked about this when they left the tower. The girl named Sistine looked down and continued that Frey had a sick younger brother, so she served Lord Bart, and she spoke with tears in her eyes. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru was holding a cup of drink. The girl named Sistine said that she wanted to tell them too, but only the friend named Hotaru said. A girl named Sistine put her hand on her chest and said that she wanted them to know that she was not a stranger to them, and asked them to tell her everything too. The main character Sojiro patted Sakura on the head and said that they don't know anything. The girl named Sistine smiled and thanked Sakura for what she did. The girl named Sakura looked at Sistine with a smile. The girl named Sakura asked what she was thanking her for. The girl named Sistine said with a sweet smile that she just wanted to thank her. The girl named Sakura smiled widely and said that she was weird, but thanked her. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled a little awkwardly and thought that they seemed to be getting along. Suddenly, a man came out to them and apologized for the wait, then introduced himself as the current Lord of Retalk, Isaac Dyack. The maid slapped him on the back of the head and said he was too loud. Some laughed at the situation, but the protagonist, Sojiro, was a little surprised and wondered if she had just hit him. A tall man entered the room and introduced himself as the current Lord of Retalk, Isaac Dyack, and said that he wanted to thank him for the victory in the tower. Too strict a lord. The maid gave him a slap on the back of the head with his slippers and said they had done it together. She looked at him sternly and said, "Was it polite that he opened the door, closed it, introduced himself, sat in the chair and thanked her?" The lord said it was. He looked at the boys and said that Mr. Fujinomiya had done a great job, and if inexperienced boys continued to end their lives in this tower, it would spread all over the world. He said that he managed to solve everything, and in the end, it was the Lord's order. The protagonist, Sojiro, thought about whether there would be a reward and said that he understood him, and in that case, let it be perceived as the Lord's merit. They told the Lord that they wanted him to keep their identity secret because they were still training. The Lord sat across from them and said loudly that he would make sure no one spilled the beans. A girl named Sakura and Ioi asked what he was talking about, and only a girl named Sistine and the protagonist's friend named Hotaru listened to them calmly. The Lord said that if anyone found out that the tower was dangerous, people would stop visiting Retalk and the economy could go into decline. A girl named Sistine asked seriously whether if the residents took part in solving the problem with the tower, would the trust in the Lord increase. The Lord quickly changed the subject and said that they needed to discuss the reward. He said that he would give 100,000 Mara for saving lives, 100,000 for defeating the monster, 100,000 for healing the townspeople, 100,000 for completing the mission, and 100,000 for completing the mission, and 100,000 for keeping quiet. He thought it was about 5 million yen. That's about 2,145,500 rubles. The Lord said he thought it would be hard for him to spend the big gold coins, so he put in the regular gold coins. The protagonist Sojiro thanked him for that. The protagonist Sojiro said that the demons on the upper floors ended the lives of the entire team, and now the same thing is happening on the floors below. He continued that the tower's fall was probably due to the fact that there have been many hunters lately and one had to be careful. The Lord scratched his beard and said that he had heard about it, but there was no way out. The Lord said that if things continue like this, it will happen again. The protagonist, Sojiro, asked him in surprise. The Lord said that after the fall, the tower looks exhausted, and usually after a while it recovers by feeding on the researchers. but they managed to reduce the number of victims. Sojiro asked again if it feeds on them. Sojiro asked again if it feeds on them. So for a while, the tower becomes silent. The Lord covered his mouth with his hands and asked them not to tell anyone about this. The girl named Sistine said indignantly that then the newcomers would be in danger. The Lord said that he knew that they didn't want newcomers to go to the tower. But when monsters appeared in the tower, there would be no one to destroy them. He said loudly that it was a vicious circle. A girl named Sistine lowered her head and agreed. She thought sadly that it was a shame to admit it, but he was right. The protagonist, Sojiro, lowered his head and thought that if no one entered the tower, then there would be no one to defeat the monsters. And if they told everything, then no newcomer would want to go there, and eventually there would be no explorers left. The protagonist, Sojiro, thought that it was because there was no organization supporting them in this world, and nothing could be done. His face was emotionless. After a while, he stood up and smiled and told the Lord that they would be leaving. The Lord smiled and said that if they did not mind, he would invite them to dinner. They shook hands, and the protagonist, Sojiro, thought that this was what the hand of a man who wielded a weapon felt like. After some time, the girl named Sakura, Sistine, and the protagonist, Sojiro, came out of the mansion. Hotaru asked where they were going now. The protagonist, Sojiro, turned to her and said that they should thank the Beta Chamber of Commerce for helping them. Sojiro continued that they would then pay off the debt, and they also needed to buy rings for the four of them. Sakura looked at Sojiro with a smile. Sojiro smiled as he recalled what had happened, and thought that Mr. Will had helped them, and it was worth paying him back. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, looked at the protagonist Sojiro seriously and asked if that would need to be done too. The protagonist Sojiro said yes. Aoi asked what this was, but the protagonist Sojiro didn't answer, but just looked at her. The girl named Sakura said that she wanted a house where they could all live together. The girl named Sakura said that that's why she wanted Mr. Will to accompany them to the main office in Fresburg. The main character, Sojiro, excitedly said that they would move and live there. Afterwards, a girl named Sakura suggested going to the hot springs. After some time, they bathed together in hot water, and only Aoi indignantly said that she wasn't allowed in there. After that, they were walking down the street, and protagonist Sojiro asked what Aoi looked like. Hotaru said with a smile that she was an ancient sword, so she had the same appearance. Aoi shouted that she was actually an elegant beauty. Protagonist Sojiro thought that he would love her regardless of her appearance. While passing by a clothing store, protagonist Sojiro suggested going there. The girls told him that the clothes in Fresburg would be better. Protagonist Sojiro said that this was not the case, and that he just wanted to know more about Aoi's preferences and appearance. A girl named Sakura and a girl named Sistine were looking at jewelry. The protagonist Sojiro asked Aoi if her hair was long. Aoi said that it was, and that it was shinier and more elegant than girlfriend Hotaru's. He smiled a little awkwardly and thought that they were going to compete. The protagonist, Sojiro, looked away thoughtfully. He said that since she had long hair, this comb would suit her very well. He picked up a beautiful comb. Aoi said that it was quite a good option. She smiled and said that it could be pinned to her hair. The protagonist, Sojiro, said it was just like the friend named Hotaru, but Aoi said it looked vulgar on her. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru turned to them and snorted. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that they would buy this comb as a memento of the summoning, for which Aoi thanked him. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru looked at them with a smile and thought that she would not argue with her now, and that Aoi was all emotional. After some time, they were already near a large building. A girl named Sistine pointed to it and said that a branch of the base company was located here. When they entered, the girl at the reception greeted them and immediately began to say that in their store, you can find almost everything, from magical stones and minerals to housing. The main character, Sojiro, was a little surprised. The girl asked what they wanted. Sojiro awkwardly looked away and thought it was amazing, then told Sistine to handle it. The girl named Sistine laughed and agreed, then began to talk to the girl. After a while, Will came to them and apologized for the wait, then told them to go in. There were cups with drinks on the table. The girls and protagonist Sojiro sat down across from Will, and protagonist Sojiro said that he had heard that Will was a good merchant, but in reality, he had a wonderful store. Will awkwardly ran his hand through his hair and said that it was all for training. Afterwards, Will asked him how he could be of help. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled and said that, firstly, Will had helped him a lot last time, and he wanted to thank him. The protagonist, Sojiro, thanked him, but Will, a little shocked, said that he should be the one thanking him. The protagonist, Sojiro, confidently said that this was not so, because he was the one who helped Sistine and saved them. Sistine said that it was true, and thanks to Will, they were able to recover, and if it weren't for him, then protagonist Sojiro would have ended his life. Protagonist Sojiro would have ended his life. Protagonist Sojiro looked at her in surprise and wondered if it was that bad. A girl named Sistine said she didn't have a plan and was just worried. Will said it was a situation that could have involved the entire town, and he had saved a group of aspiring adventurers who were stuck in that dungeon. Will said that they defeated the monsters and even the main boss. He looked down and continued that they cleared the dungeon faster than the others and said that he himself wanted to be able to do that, and even the thought of it warmed his soul. Hotaru smiled and said that it meant he was their first fan. Will asked in surprise what a fan was. The protagonist, Sojiro, explained that it was a person who loved and supported someone, and in his hometown, they were called fans. Will said he was a real fan then. They were genuinely happy about that. The protagonist, Sojiro, put a bag of coins on the table and said that it was payment for the ring. Will, shocked, asked if it was the full amount. Will said it had only been 5 days since he gave them the ring, but then he apologized and said of course they would have paid the full amount. Then he wondered what that light was. The girl named Sistine put her hand on her chest and said with a smile that they had fulfilled the contract and were no longer bound. The protagonist, Sojiro, looked at her with a smile and thought that now she would not be punished anymore. The girl named Sakura looked at the protagonist, Sojiro, smiling. He said that he wanted to have 4 rings and of course they would pay extra. Will said that it seemed like he had made friends. Then he smiled broadly and asked me to wait while he brought them. After some time, each of them had a ring on their wrist. While the girls were looking at the rings, the protagonist, Sojiro, thought that with the ring, he could feel the 3 of them. And that was a very reliable thing. Aoi thought that she was jealous of them, but she should keep quiet, because she should be a real lady. The protagonist, Sojiro, approached Will again, and said that they wanted to change their residence and set up a residence, and so he wanted to ask Will to introduce him to the base chamber of commerce headquarters. Will thought about it and asked again if he wanted to settle in Fresburg, after which he agreed, and said that since he was an adventurer, this place was ideal for him. But many people wanted to live there, and all the available housing was currently occupied. The main character, Sojiro, called out to Sistine, and she took out a bag of coins from her bag, then put it on the table, then handed him the crystal. Will was very shocked. He looked at it with his mouth open. Afterwards, he confidently told them to rely on their company and that they would provide them with the best accommodation in Fresburg. After some time, they were near the house, and the girl named Sakura said that they had succeeded, and that she thought that they would only find housing for a couple of people. The girl named Sakura felt the ring on her wrist. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled and thought that she seemed to like the ring, and that he liked it too. Hotaru folded her arms and said that they needed a garden big enough to train in. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that she seemed full of energy. A girl named Sistine smiled, put her hand on her chest, and said that she wanted a house with a kitchen because there were many dishes that she would like to cook for him. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled widely and said that the kitchen was a must, and he had high hopes for her cooking. The girl named Sistine thanked him, and the protagonist, Sojiro, hugged her, thinking that she was cute. Sakura ran towards them, spreading her arms and saying that she wanted it too. Hotaru just chuckled. They all hugged each other, and the protagonist's friend named Hotaru kissed him on the lips. After some time, Sistine's dress was already lying on the floor, and the room was filled with sounds. The main character, Sojiro, caressed Sistine, saying that she was probably tired after the tower, and he would have to work. The girl named Sakura looked at him with shining eyes, and the protagonist, Sojiro, said that she deserved a reward too. The girl named Sakura lay on her stomach in front of him, and said that she wanted to work with her mouth too, The protagonist, Sojiro, approached the protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru and touched her with his hands, saying that she deserved a kiss, and kissed her. The protagonist's girlfriend named Hotaru moaned contentedly. After some time, they were lying on the bed together, covered with a blanket. The main character, Sojiro, looked at Sistine and asked if she was asleep. The girl named Sistine said no. The main character, Sojiro, looked at her and said that he would tell her a story then, and then began his story. The girl named Sistine looked at him with interest and raised herself up on her elbows. Now he would tell everything. After some time, the protagonist Sojiro and the girl named Sistine came out into the street. The protagonist Sojiro was sitting on the porch, and the girl named Sistine was standing in front of him. There were stars and a beautiful moon in the sky. The main character, Sojiro, said how beautiful it was. The girl named Sistine smiled and put her hands behind her back, asking what he wanted to talk about. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled and said that it was a bit late, but she wanted to know how they got here. The girl named Sistine was surprised and put her hands on her chest, asking if he was sure. The main character, Sojiro, confidently said yes. He scratched his head awkwardly and said what he was going to tell. The girl named Sistine leaned over a little and continued that he had forgotten. The main character, Sojiro, said yes and apologized. The girl named Sistine looked at him angrily. He said that it was not because he did not trust her. The girl named Sistine smiled sweetly and said that she was not angry with him. A girl named Sistine said that she always knew there were some things he couldn't tell her. The protagonist, Sojiro, listened to her with interest, his mouth slightly open. The girl named Sistine continued that she felt a little alienated, which shocked the protagonist, Sojiro. The girl named Sakura looked out the window and said that when she said that, the protagonist, Sojiro, got all worked up. Aoi said that she knew that the girl named Sistine wasn't a sword. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru agreed with a smile. Aoi asked who she was then. Looking at Sojiro and Sistine, the protagonist's friend named Hotaru replied that she was a very important friend. A girl named Sistine sat next to the protagonist, Sojiro, and he began to say that one day, his father ended his life. The girl named Sistine looked at him in surprise. Reminiscing about the past, the protagonist, Sojiro, continued that he lived in a place where even bad people were forbidden to end their lives, and he could not find his place and felt isolated from the rest of the world. And one day, they were robbed, and one of the robbers was his father, who left home when he was very little. A girl named Sistine looked at him with pity. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that it was then that he ended his life in a battle with his father. The girl named Sakura, the protagonist's friend named Hotaru, and Aoi listened to him silently. The girl named Sakura sadly lowered her head. The protagonist, Sojiro, looked at Sistine, saying that even if he had survived, he would have been blamed for ending someone's life when he was only trying to protect himself. The protagonist, Sojiro, continued that he felt at home in that warehouse, and that swords were more important to him than his family. The protagonist's friend, named Hotaru, and the girl named Sakura, smiled. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that his relatives treated him coldly, although he knows that this is just an excuse. The girl named Sistine put her hand on his hands and said with a smile that he was protecting his real family. The main character, Sojiro, looked at her a little surprised. The girl named Sistine said that if the friend named Hotaru, the girl named Sakura, and Aoi knew about this, they would understand everything. She thought that his action was admirable. She smiled sincerely, and the protagonist, Sojiro, blushed slightly at her words. The main character, Sojiro, said that this is a world where he can be himself. He said that he ended his life and then was reborn on this planet. A girl named Sistine asked him in surprise what he was talking about. She smiled awkwardly and asked what a planet and rebirth were. The main character, Sojiro, smiled widely and said that he would explain everything now, and the planet where he ended his life was called Earth. The girl named Sistine laughed awkwardly, and Sojiro thought that she seemed to not understand anything at all. The main character, Sojiro, folded his arms and asked if she was bothering him, then said that the books here don't write about Isekai. The girl named Sistine shook her head and said that it wasn't true, and she believed him. She frowned and said that she had wanted to know everything from the beginning. The meaning of the words, he said, the clothes made of materials she had never seen, and what it all explained. She raised her finger and said that she just doesn't know words like Earth and planet. The main character, Sojiro, put his hand in the bag and said that the planet is the Earth, but on which they live. The main character, Sojiro, took out a small ball and showed it to Sistine, saying that the Earth looks like a ball. A girl named Sistine asked curiously why the people at the bottom didn't fall. The main character, Sojiro, said that the bottom was the center of the ball. She said she understood. The main character, Sojiro, told her to imagine this ball and look at the sky. The girl named Sistine immediately raised her head and looked at the sky. She said it was a beautiful night sky. The protagonist, Sojiro, said that a canvas full of shining dots is called a starry sky. A girl named Sistine looked at the sky and repeated the words, ball, star, sky. The main character, Sojiro, raised the ball up and said that these are all stars. Looking up, he said that they were so small because they were so far away. and there were very few planets among them that could support life. Sistine said with interest that among the countless number of these stars, she was born on the planet Earth. A girl named Sistine thought this was too much information and said she understood. She smiled broadly and turning to him, took his hand, and said that there are many planets, and somewhere out there was their planet. But her face quickly became a little sad. The protagonist, Sojiro, thought that the atmosphere had changed somehow quickly, but he understood why. The main character, Sojiro, took her hand and told her not to worry, because he would not return to Earth, and did not intend to. The fact that they are here with him and this world, he became very attached to it. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru and the girl named Sakura listened to this with a smile on their face. The main character, Sojiro, asked her if she would take care of him. The girl, named Sistine, smiled widely and agreed. They looked out the window, and the protagonist, Sojiro, called out to Hotaru. Hotaru said that she knew, and from now on, no secrets would be kept from her. The girl named Sakura knelt on the windowsill and said that she was also in her care. Sakura jumped down to them and hugged Sojiro. The protagonist, Sojiro, said in shock that it was reckless to jump out of the window like that. Sakura said that she was so happy that she couldn't contain herself. Sistine said that Sakura was a true kunoichi. Sojiro and Sakura looked at her and asked what she was talking about. Hotaru came out to them and asked what was wrong. The main character, Sojiro, stood up and looked at her, asking if she had told Sistine about kunoichi. The main character's friend named Hotaru said no. The girl named Sistine put her hand to her mouth a little nervously and asked herself how she did it. The main character, Sojiro, asked seriously what Nihotu was. The girl named Sistine said that it was a type of weapon made using Japanese traditional blacksmithing techniques. Sistine pointed her finger in shock and called up the display. She was studying information about herself. Her special ability, Wisdom Archive. Sojiro asked in surprise if her special ability had really changed. The girl named Sakura read the inscription, Wisdom Archive. A girl named Sistine thoughtfully placed her finger to her chin and said that the wisdom text allowed her to understand the meaning of words. She hugged the friend named Hotaru, asking why it changed. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru said that it was because she believed with all her heart in the story that the protagonist Sojiro told her. The protagonist Sojiro opened his mouth and thought that the archive of wisdom allows her to understand not only the words of this world, but also the words of the earth. The girl named Sakura spread her arms out to the sides. A girl named Sakura walked up to the girls to hug them, and the protagonist, Sojiro, watched with a smile, thinking that in this case, he would be able to tell her about Earth without any misunderstandings. After some time, it was already light outside. They walked down the street, and the protagonist, Sojiro, said in surprise that this was Freisberg. A girl named Sakura said that it was amazing. Will said with a smile that they should follow him. The protagonist, Sojiro, raised his head and closed his eyes, then looked at Will with a smile and asked if there was a big waterfall nearby. Will said yes, and there was a beach, mountains, hills, and a tower nearby. He said that in the north they would find the Boothel Tower, where adventurers collect magic crystals, and to the west is the beach and the local harbor, and all possible goods and sea products pass through the port. He also said that the mountains of Pakari are located to the east, and are full of wild animals that are suitable as game and raw materials. And finally, heading south, they will come across the Funas Plains, famous for their vegetation. The protagonist, Sojiro, smiled widely and introduced a friend named Hotaru, Sakura, and Sistine to the beach in a swimsuit. Will pointed ahead and said that, further ahead, was the center of the bay's companies. The main character, Sojiro, thought that in this world, summer days were the same and they could have fun on the beach. He imagined himself running along the beach with the girls and having fun. He imagined himself being called by the protagonist's friend named Hotaru and the girl named Sakura in different poses. As a girl named Sistine lies on a towel and says that it's good that this is a private beach, and he suggests that she apply sunscreen. He imagined himself touching Sistine and she saying that of course she likes this feeling from behind. And the girl named Sakura smilingly says to insert it here and quickly. He imagined himself touching Hotaru, and she asking him not to forget about her. A girl named Sakura holds his shoulder and tells him that it was his fault that she got wet, and the protagonist Sojiro asks where she learned to do such things. But his dreams stopped when they were already sitting on the couch. He looked at Will and some man with confusion, and thought that an old man had appeared in front of him, and Will was crying for some reason. Will held the old man's hands and thanked him with tears. The old man looked at Protagonist Sojiro, and Protagonist Sojiro thought he was evaluating him with his eyes. The display said that this was a knock base, and he was the main merchant. Protagonist Sojiro thought that this was his father. Hotaru looked at Sojiro and mentally said that while he was lost in the clouds, Sistine sold the magic stone using her skill. Sojiro thought that he understood and everything was according to the plan. And what would he do without this method of communication? The protagonist Sojiro looked at the crystal and thought that considering how rare it was a good purchase in itself, and it seemed like Will's ordeal was coming to an end, which was probably why he was so touched. The old man said enthusiastically that it was time to get down to business, and Will, just as enthusiastically, agreed. The old man pointed at them and told Will that the Bay's company would be fully funding his team and that he shouldn't be rude to them. Will said that of course they would. The protagonist Sojiro smiled and thought that the two were on their own. After some time, they were walking down the street, and the protagonist Sojiro said with a smile that they now had cash, so they could go look for a new house. Will walked next to them and asked to let him help them. The protagonist Sojiro took the map and began to study it, saying that they were even given a map of Freisberg. The girl named Sistine looked at something in surprise, and the girl named Sakura asked her what happened. Sistine smiled a little awkwardly and said that she was a little shocked because they literally had 15 million gauze, 150 million yen. Sakura said that was true, although the protagonist Sojiro didn't really care about the crystal. A girl named Sistine looked around and said that it was the first time she had seen 5-story buildings. A girl named Sakura asked if Bays was really that big. Sistine looked at Sojiro and said that the reason why the protagonist Sojiro wasn't surprised by these buildings was because of the so-called skyscrapers. Sojiro spoke to Hotaru, thinking that maybe she didn't know that he was in the clouds. The girl named Sistine and the girl named Sakura continued to follow them, and the girl named Sistine said that this was to be expected from a foreigner. Sistine said that the kitchen was too small. Hotaru frowned and said that training in such a garden was problematic, and Oi said that she wanted a dressing room. A girl named Sakura said that she wanted a house with an attic. While the girls were talking to Will, the protagonist Sojiro sat nearby and studied the house plans. He thought that the choice of real estate was quite large. Studying the buildings, he thought they were not bad, but some were robbed, poorly located, or even far from the city center. Looking at one of the drawings, he thought that this one was the size of a mansion. But then he became wary and wondered what the catch was. After some time, they came to that mansion. Standing in front of the gate, Will said that this mansion was a country house of one lord. However, something happened within the territory. They looked at the mansion with interest. Will said seriously that hot water with a sulfurous smell burst out of the ground. He continued that fortunately there were no casualties, but as a result the mansion was abandoned. The protagonist's friend Hotaru and the protagonist Sojiro looked at the mansion warily. The protagonist Sojiro wondered if this was what he thought it was. They immediately entered the gates of the grounds and asked to take a look at the place. There were many piles of broken boards and bricks lying around the area. They sat down on the ground near the darkened trace from where the water had apparently burst out. The protagonist Sojiro raised his hand and shouted excitedly that this was a hot springs site and that he even missed the smell of sulfur. Hotaru looked at him and said that it was safe here too. The main character Sojiro said that now she can enjoy a hot bath as she wished. The main character's friend Hotaru was surprised at first, but then smiled and said that he remembered about it. The protagonist Sojiro grabbed his chin in interest, and the protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru said that they would build stone fences to collect the water. She looked at protagonist Sojiro with a smile, saying that they would also add a small room between them to prevent the smell from seeping into the mansion, and a drainage system that would flow into the river nearby. The protagonist Sojiro said that considering how busy they were, maids would be a good backup, and that 5 or 6 would be enough. A girl named Sistine, with a sinister look, said that he did not need anyone but her. The protagonist Sojiro was startled by her sudden appearance and turned to her, asking how she ended up here. She had been here the whole time, and the girl named Sakura said that she had been there too. Hotaru asked if he had noticed her. The protagonist's friend, Hotaru, coughed into her fist. He said that in that case they would choose this mansion. The girl named Sakura jumped up and down with happiness. Will smiled widely and said that they would take care of the furniture and restoration, then thanked them. A couple of days later, Will said that this was their new house. Inside was a very beautiful large kitchen and room, large area, in the garden of which there was equipment for training and stone walls with water. The girls looked at their new home with a smile. The main character Sojiro bowed, thanking the workers. The girl named Sakura smiled widely and said that she was happy to say that she had learned to use money wisely. The protagonist Sojiro asked if she was talking about the room with secret passages and mechanisms. The protagonist Sojiro recalled his conversation with Will when he received the bill. The protagonist Sojiro then asked him in surprise what the mechanical expenses were, and Will told him that they were the expenses of Lady Sakura's special request. The protagonist Sojiro continued that he was so surprised to hear about it, but she already got hers. He remembered what he did to Sakura. But Sakura seemed to like it, because she asked him to be even tougher. The workers said with tears in their eyes that only with her help were they able to learn how to build complex mechanisms. They started throwing Sakura up in the air, telling her to be happy and live a long life. The girl named Sakura laughed, and the protagonist Sojiro said that she hadn't thought about it. A girl named Sakura looked at them with a smile and said that tomorrow was the final day, and told them to do her a favor and disappear. The workers said that she said such hurtful things with a smile, and that's why they appreciated her. As the workers left, they said they would see each other again, and the protagonist Sojiro awkwardly scratched his head, thanking them. At home, the protagonist Sojiro smiled happily, and the girl named Sujiro smiled happily, and the girl named Sistine wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, saying that he was drooling. The protagonist's friend Hotaru smirked and asked what they expected, since he could finally bathe in the hot springs. Aoi immediately said that she would be rusty, so it would happen without her. After some time, the protagonist Sojiro poured water from the spring on himself. He looked at his groin and thought that he needed to relax first. The protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru came up to him and said that this is how he prepares for a warm bath. The protagonist Sojiro looked at her in shock. The protagonist's girlfriend Hotaru was naked and smirking at him while holding a towel on her shoulder. The protagonist, Sojiro, called out to her in shock and said that she was completely naked and not covering herself. Sakura and Sistine also came to them, covering themselves with towels. Sakura noticed that she had let her hair down and said that it was very cute. Sistine said that she had been anticipating this moment from her stories for a long time. Sojiro lowered himself into the water and relaxed with his mouth open. A girl named Sakura and a girl named Sistine were sitting on a bench, and the girl named Sakura was pouring water on her, saying that she needed more water, and Sistine was asking her to wait. Hotaru was sitting next to the protagonist Sojiro and putting her hair in a ponytail. The protagonist's friend named Hotaru looked at the protagonist Sojiro and started to climb into the water, asking if she could sit in it. The protagonist Sojiro looked at her and agreed,